Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Voyager, where history drifts like a tide and journeys unfold slowly. Tonight's voyage takes us into Columbus's quiet voyage across the Atlantic. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to leave the last lights of Spain behind, with only stars to guide you across an ocean that seemed endless? Or how sailors comforted themselves with songs and small jokes, while the horizon stayed the same day after day? If these calm wanderings bring you comfort, you're welcome to like or subscribe, only if it feels right. And if you'd like, share in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always a joy to see where our quiet fleet gathers, each lantern glowing in its own harbour. Now dim the lights, perhaps let a soft hum or fan play like the wind, and step aboard. If your thoughts wander, that's perfectly fine. The ship will keep on sailing, carrying you into calm waters. Tonight, you and I are walking together into the quiet harbour of Palos in the south of Spain on an evening in early August of the year 1492. The sun has already descended beyond the hills, and the last of its glow lingers in streaks of amber and rose along the horizon, fading into the first shades of night. There is no fanfare here, no bustling crowd to witness what would one day be called the beginning of a new age. Instead, there is the low murmur of men preparing their vessels, the distant call of a gull who has not yet followed the land's edge back to its nesting place, and the creak of ships that seem to breathe with the motion of the tide. 3 ships rest in the dimming light, tethered side by side as though leaning upon one another for courage. Later their names will become familiar: Niña, Pinta and Santa Maria. Yet in this moment they are simply wooden silhouettes, dark against the silver sheen of the water, with lanterns flickering along their decks. The Niña, small and nimble, seems to sway with an almost eager restlessness, as if impatient for the open sea. The Pinta, broader and sturdier, rocks with a slower rhythm, its timbers creaking like a thoughtful elder. The Santa Maria, largest of them all, sits with the stillness of a heavy sleeper, her ropes slack yet humming faintly whenever the evening breeze brushes through. None of them appear like ships of destiny. Rather, they resemble floating houses, shelters of oak and pine tied together with tarred rope, modest and vulnerable against the immensity of the Atlantic that awaits them. On the wharf, men move quietly with bundles of provisions, the rhythm of their footsteps softened by the wood planks beneath. A barrel rolls with a muffled thud, followed by laughter quickly hushed, as if laughter itself might ripple too far across the still water. The air carries the mingled sense of pitch, used to seal the planks against the sea's intrusion, and the sharper tang of salted fish. Somewhere, nearby a dog barks once, then settles again. Even in this place of departure, the world is not shouting but whispering, as though the entire village holds its breath. Among these figures walks Christopher Columbus, though if you looked upon him now, you would not immediately think of him as the architect of a world-altering voyage. His step is not the march of a conqueror, but the measured tread of a man immersed in thought. In his hand he carries no sword, only a small notebook bound in worn leather, where he jots his reckonings and prayers by the glow of lantern light. His eyes lift now and then toward the ships, not with pride, but with a kind of quiet wonder, as if even he does not fully grasp the vastness of what lies before him. Perhaps in his mind he sees not the dark horizon, but the imagined markets of Cathay, the shining temples of lands he believes just beyond the edge of this ocean. Or perhaps he is simply listening to the sound of the tide against the stone pier, steady and eternal, a reminder that whatever man may dream, the sea will always hold its own counsel. You might imagine yourself standing there beside him, the cool night air brushing against your skin, the wood of the pier faintly damp beneath your feet. To your left, a group of sailors huddle together, sharing murmurs and passing a wineskin between them, its contents dwindling with every tilt. Their voices are not full of bravado, but of unease, the way men speak when they try to disguise uncertainty with jest. One points toward the horizon, joking that monsters surely wait just beyond the reach of sight, while another retorts that the only monster he fears is the cook's hard bread. They laugh softly, though in their laughter is the tremor of men who know they are leaving everything familiar behind. Beyond the human sounds, the harbour itself seems alive in its own gentle way. Lantern light scatters across the water, making it shimmer like fragments of broken stars. Each ripple distorts the reflection of the ships, so that they appear to sway even when the tide rests. The ropes, thick and rough, tighten and slacken with the slow breathing of the current, their fibres whispering against the wooden posts. Somewhere, far out at sea, lightning flickers faintly within a cloud, a reminder of storms yet unseen. But here in the harbour there is stillness, as though the world itself has given Columbus and his companions one final night of peace before the long uncertainty. As you breathe with this scene, notice how time seems to slow. The tasks of the sailors, the creak of wood, the flicker of flame, all move at a rhythm that is neither hurried nor delayed, but suspended in a kind of waiting. History often tells this departure as a bold, decisive moment, yet here it feels more like slipping quietly into a dream, a transition so gentle that you hardly notice when one life ends and another begins. The men on the pier do not think of centuries ahead. They think of their families, of the bread cooling in ovens back in their homes, of the familiar bells of the church that will soon be too far to hear. For them this is not destiny, but simply the next dawn they must face upon the water. Now, if you close your eyes, you might hear the harbour not only as a place of wood and stone, but as a lullaby itself. The soft lap of water against the hull becomes a rhythm steady and repetitive, like the beating of a distant heart. The murmurs of the men become a low drone, blending with the night air until they are indistinguishable from the wind. The lanterns sway gently, their light painting arcs across the deck, as if guiding invisible hands to cradle the ships into slumber. You might even imagine the ships themselves dreaming, each one carrying within it the hopes and fears of those who will soon call it home. And so we linger in this harbour of stillness, not rushing to the open sea, but allowing ourselves to rest in the moment before departure. It is in these pauses, these delicate interludes, that journeys truly begin. Not with the first wave or the first mile, but with the gathering of breath before the plunge. Tonight, Columbus and his sailors gather that breath together, and perhaps you too gather yours, here in the safety of your own harbour, ready to drift into the long voyage of sleep. The night deepens, and the harbour holds its breath as though it too is waiting, not only for the tide but for history itself to stir. Out upon the water, the three ships rest in a kind of slumber, tethered gently, their masts rising into the sky like darkened spires. Lanterns still glow faintly, swaying with the rhythm of the tide, and every so often the sails themselves give a faint rustle, as though impatient for the winds of the morning. For now, however, the canvas hangs loose, folds of heavy cloth waiting to be unfurled, like a story waiting for its first sentence. Each ship has its own character, and though the men see them simply as vessels, you may notice how they resemble more than just timber and rope. The Nina, small and swift, seems to lean toward the sea, even while tied to the pier, a restless child tugging at its mother's hand, eager to dash into the unknown. The Pinta, broader and more balanced, holds herself like a cautious walker at the edge of a path, ready to step forward but unwilling to stumble. The Santa Maria, largest of the three, remains steady, her broad frame creaking as she absorbs the movements of the tide, not unlike a weary matron carrying the weight of a household upon her shoulders. Together they are a family of sorts, each one distinct, yet bound to one another by the fate of the voyage. On their deck, sailors move slowly, adjusting ropes, checking barrels and tying down whatever might roll when the ships lurch into motion. Their tasks are ordinary, yet at this hour they take on the air of ritual. A man coils a rope, his hands working as they have countless times before, the rough fibres pressing against his palms, leaving small ridges in his skin. Another lifts a lantern to inspect a patch of tar along the deck, the flame bending and trembling as though nervous to be so near the black pitch. Farther along, a sailor kneels over a barrel, dipping a ladle into water to test its clarity, muttering to himself as if bargaining with the cask to remain fresh until landfall. They are not grand gestures, these preparations, but small ones, and it is often in the small gestures that survival is secured. If you listen closely, you will hear the voices of these men weaving in and out of the night air. Some murmur prayers under their breath, words carried from mothers and priests long before the sea called them away. Others exchange dry jokes to mask unease, joking that the voyage will last longer than their patience with salted cod, or that perhaps the captain intends to sail straight into the moon and sell it to the king. Their humour is brittle, fragile as old rope, but still it binds them together, for laughter on a ship is as necessary as bread. Without it, fear grows louder than the waves. In the distance, the bells of the town's church sound once, a gentle chime that drifts over the water before dissolving. That sound will be the last tether to land for many weeks. Beyond tomorrow, the ocean itself will keep, the time marked by sand through hourglasses and the slow turning of the sun. Columbus himself walks the pier again, speaking softly to the captains of the other ships, Martin Alonso Pinzon of the Pinta and Vicente Yanez Pinzon of the Niña, brothers seasoned by the sea. Their words are practical, routes, supplies, the wind expected at dawn, but beneath the talk lies an unspoken acknowledgement that once sails are raised, there is no certainty of return. They know this, yet they do not linger on it, for sailors rarely speak directly of such shadows. They tuck them beneath humour, beneath superstition, beneath the ordinary routines of rope and nail. You may imagine stepping quietly onto the deck of the Santa Maria, where the largest of the crews will soon sleep in hammocks or on rough planks, the smell of tar and wood filling the air. The sails loom above, not yet pulled tight, but folded like heavy curtains awaiting their cue. When morning comes and the ropes are hauled, those sails will billow out, great white wings unfurling to catch the breath of the Atlantic. For now they wait, their silence as eloquent as any speech, reminding us that journeys often begin not with the roar of motion but with the patience of stillness. Notice the way the night air settles on your skin, cool and faintly damp, bringing with it the taste of salt carried inland by the breeze. The stars above sharpen into clarity as the village lights dim, and the sailors glance upward often, some pointing out constellations as though they were old friends who will guide them across the deep. One man gestures toward a cluster of stars and insists they look like a fish. Another laughs, claiming the fish must be the one they will eat when the cook finally learns to season it. The banter is soft, almost tender, for men who may never see home again. In such moments, humour is not mere jest, it is a prayer disguised as laughter. Columbus, standing apart for a moment, watches the sails stir faintly in the night breeze. Perhaps he thinks of maps that promised a shorter route to Asia, of letters written to monarchs who doubted, of visions of Jerusalem and the end of days that drove his restless heart. Or perhaps, in this quiet harbour, he allows himself a rare moment of simplicity, listening to the canvas shift, watching the lanterns dance, feeling the boards of the pier steady beneath his boots. Even the most determined navigator must rest in stillness before commanding motion, for no sail catches the wind until it has first hung in silence. As you breathe in this scene, you may feel the same anticipation the ships themselves seem to carry. Their timbers, seasoned by other voyages, groan softly as if whispering among themselves, wondering what horizons they will meet. The ropes sway with the tide, knocking gently against the masts, each tap like a heartbeat in the quiet. The sails hang folded, patient but eager, and you sense that even they long for morning, when the first strong, breeze will tug at their edges and lift them into full voice. And so, tonight, we leave them as they are, Nina, Pinta and Santa Maria, vessels of wood and hope, resting with sails waiting for wind. Tomorrow they will stretch their canvas wings and slip beyond the line of the horizon, but for now they remain in harbour, not yet memory, not yet legend, simply ships at rest under the Spanish sky. And as you lie here listening, perhaps you too may feel your own sails loosening, not with hurry, but with readiness, waiting for the quiet wind of sleep to carry you gently outward into dreams. When the harbour finally surrenders to sleep, and the ships rock quietly as though they are breathing in rhythm with the tide, Columbus retreats to his cabin and lays out what to him is more precious than gold, more necessary than bread, and more reassuring than prayer: his maps. They are not maps as we would imagine them today, precise and measured, filled with exact distances and reliable coastlines. They are rather paintings of hope, guesses disguised as geometry, fragments of land traced by men who had only glimpsed horizons and imagined what lay beyond them. These maps carry oceans drawn smaller than they are, islands drawn larger than they should be, and names of places more mythical than real. They are not charts of truth, but charts of longing, and perhaps that is why Columbus keeps them so close, for they mirror his own imagination as much as the earth itself. Spread across the wooden table, the parchment curls at its corners, edges browned from handling, salt air, and the smoke of countless lanterns. Ink lines trace across the vellum like veins in a leaf, delicate yet insistent, and Columbus's finger drifts slowly along them, pausing where an imagined shore is drawn, then gliding across where the open sea is shaded pale, as if distance itself could be soothed by touch. In one corner of the map a scribe has inked words in a flowing hand: Cathay, Cipango, the Indies, names that shimmer not with familiarity but with the brilliance of legend. They promise spices, gold, silks and wonders, though no one who inked those words had ever stood upon the soil they described. The map is less a window to the world than a mirror of desire, a dream flattened onto parchment. Imagine looking over his shoulder in that quiet space. The lantern above flickers, and its glow falls unevenly across the parchment, making the ocean seem to ripple, and the coastlines appear to shift like mirages. Columbus, his brow furrowed in concentration, leans close, as if listening to the map, waiting for it to whisper secrets only he is meant to hear. The air in the cabin is thick with the scent of smoke, resin, and damp cloth. Outside, the sound of the harbour seeps faintly through the planks, water brushing the hull, a rope groaning against its post, the occasional laughter of sailors drifting into silence. Yet here, in this circle of lamplight, all of that fades, and the world shrinks to parchment and ink. Maps in this time were stitched together from travellers' tales, ancient texts and bold guesses. Mariners drew coastlines they had heard of but never seen, shaped islands from rumour, and stretched oceans according to what they hoped was manageable. The scholar Toscanelli, whose ideas Columbus cherished, had imagined Asia lying far closer to Europe than it truly was, so that by sailing west across what they called the Ocean Sea, one might reach the fabled markets of Cathay with ease. To us the error is vast, to Columbus it was providence, the shortening of the world by divine hand. And so, when his finger travels across the Atlantic on that parchment, he does not see thousands of empty miles. He sees only a narrow sea, a mere passage, a river that can be crossed with patience and prayer. He smooths the parchment with his palm, and you may notice how the maps resemble more than diagrams. They are in their way like lullabies written in ink. The coastlines curve like verses, the oceans widen like pauses, and the names themselves are refrains repeated softly. Cipango, Cathay, the Indies. Their words meant less for precision than for comfort, guiding the restless heart toward a horizon it longs to believe in. Columbus, tracing these names, may have felt not unlike a child listening to a story by firelight, knowing it is only half true yet clinging to it because it carries the warmth of possibility. At times he lifts his gaze from the parchment to the stars visible through the narrow cabin window. The constellations glitter in the black sky, and for a moment they seem to echo the inked lines before him. Both stars and maps are attempts to make sense of vastness, one etched by nature, the other by human hand, yet both fragile, both open to interpretation. The sailors will trust the stars more readily, for stars at least do not lie, but Columbus, whose heart is bound to visions, trusts the ink, trusts the dream sketched on vellum, trusts that the world is smaller, that God has folded the ocean for him like cloth so that he may cross it. Humour, even here, finds its way in. For among the crew the maps are sometimes treated with less reverence. A sailor once muttered that the only map he trusted was the smell of the wind and the cry of birds, for those at least told him when land was near. Another swore that maps were only good for wrapping dried fish, since the ocean had a habit of ignoring them. Yet even as they jest, they watch Columbus pore over his charts with a kind of wary fascination, sensing that for him these papers are more than tools. They are talismans, fragile yet powerful, like charms written in ink. As the night drifts on, the lantern gutters lower, and Columbus rests his hand upon the parchment, as though sealing a promise with the weight of his palm. He whispers a prayer, words too soft to catch, but perhaps you can imagine their shape, that God will carry these fragile drawings into reality, that the ocean will shrink to the size of the inked sea before him, that the ships will find the shores marked only by names and hope. Outside, the sails stir faintly again, waiting for the morning, waiting for wind, and within the cabin the maps too seem to wait, their lines resting but not asleep, ready to guide men across waters they cannot yet comprehend. For now, though, they are only dreams, dreams folded upon a table, surrounded by silence, illuminated by the trembling light of a single flame. And perhaps as you close your eyes tonight, you may find your own map waiting within you, lines not of ink but of memory and imagination, guiding you gently towards sleep's uncharted shore. When dawn arrives, the harbour begins to stir, and with it the quiet routines of sailors who know that survival at sea depends as much on ritual as on courage. Their hands, weathered and marked by rope burns, reach not only for sails and planks, but also for the strange instruments of their craft, objects that might look to you like curiosities from an antique shop, but to them are lifelines, ways of reaching into the heavens to ask for direction. These instruments do not roar, do not gleam like weapons. They are modest pieces of brass and wood, worn by touch, simple in shape, yet carrying within them the hope that the ocean can be measured, that vastness can be charted, that men can find their way across emptiness. The first of these is the astrolabe, a disc of brass with markings like the rings of a tree, its surface etched with degrees and arcs that trace the language of the stars. In Columbus's hand it appears heavy, almost clumsy, yet when lifted against the horizon it becomes delicate, a tool for catching the angle of a star as though one could hold a piece of the night sky in metal. Imagine him standing at the rail, the sea rocking gently beneath his feet, holding the astrolabe against the sky, squinting to see where a bright point of light aligns with the markings. To explain it technically would be to drain it of wonder, so instead think of it as a kind of key, unlocking the silent song of the heavens, allowing sailors to measure their place not by land or coastline but by the eternal fires above. Beside the astrolabe rests the quadrant, a quarter circle of wood with a string and weight hanging freely, trembling with each movement of the ship. By aligning the edge with the sun, or a star, and noting where the plumb line crosses the scale, sailors could read latitude, though never with the precision of modern charts. Still, in their hands this humble piece of wood became a compass of dreams, its swinging string like the pendulum of time itself. Picture it trembling in the night air, the lantern light catching the glint of its metal nails, and a sailor muttering as though in conversation with the star he measures. To outsiders it would seem absurd that a swinging weight could reveal position on an endless sea, but to those aboard it was no less than a whisper from the cosmos. More modest still is the hourglass, its two bulbs of glass narrowing at the throat, filled with fine sand that slips through with the patience of eternity. Every half hour the glass is turned, the sound of a sand like soft rain within its chamber. Time aboard a ship does not march in minutes as we know it. It drips, grain by grain, into silence, measured by the glass and by the ship's bell, which is struck with steady solemnity to mark the watches of the crew. For sailors, the hourglass is less about precision than rhythm. It keeps the heart of the voyage beating, reminding men when to change shifts, when to rest, when to climb the rigging once more. The glass becomes, in a sense, the ship's pulse, and each turning is like the drawing of a breath. Then there is the log line, a coil of rope knotted at intervals, tossed over the stern to drift in the wake of the ship. As it unspools, the sailors count the knots that slip through their fingers during the turning of the sand in a small glass, and from this they estimate the ship's speed. Crude, yes, but effective enough, and it is from these knots that the term for nautical miles per hour, knots, still lingers in our language. Imagine a sailor, his fingers numb from the salt spray, murmuring counts under his breath as the rope slides, each knot like a bead on a rosary, each count a step in their invisible journey. He does not see charts or reckonings. He feels distance in the friction of rope against his palm. These tools, taken together, seem fragile, even laughable, when set against the vastness of the Atlantic. A disc of brass, a quarter of wood, a glass of sand, a rope with knots, such small things to pit against endless horizons. And yet, in their way, they embody the quiet genius of humanity, that men, armed with almost nothing, will still attempt to measure the immeasurable, will still seek patterns in the chaos, will still dare to cross what others fear. There is humour in it too, for among the sailors it was often said that the instruments were most reliable when left in their boxes, and that the surest guide was the memory of the Pinzon brothers, who knew the winds better than brass or glass ever could. Still, even those who mock the tools would watch with fascination when Columbus lifted the astrolabe to the sky, as though expecting him to summon secrets from the stars themselves. In the evenings, when the sea calms and the sky opens wide, these instruments come alive. Lanterns are dimmed so that the stars may be clearer, and the deck becomes an observatory afloat. A sailor holds the quadrant carefully, his hand steady despite the ship's rolling, aligning it with Polaris, the North Star whose fixed gaze has guided countless voyages. Another notes the reading and murmurs it into the darkness, where Columbus writes it down, the scratch of his quill faint against the wood. The hourglass is turned with a solemn grace, its sand beginning again, as if resetting not just time but faith. The log line unspools into the Black Sea, its knots clicking softly in the sailor's fingers, the sound barely audible over the wash of water, yet somehow reassuring, like the ticking of a heart. If you close your eyes now, you might hear all of this not as mathematics, but as music. The quadrant's plumb line swings like a metronome. The hourglass hisses with its tiny rain. The knots slide with a soft rhythm, and above them the stars shine in endless silence, providing the melody. Together they form the orchestra of navigation, fragile instruments playing beneath the infinite ceiling of the heavens. Columbus, listening, believes himself in harmony with the design of God, convinced that these small voices of brass, wood, sand and rope will lead them to promised shores. And so the tools of navigation, humble as they are, do not simply measure, they console. They remind the sailors that the ocean, vast though it may be, is not entirely unknowable. They whisper that the sea can be counted, that distance can be reckoned, that men adrift are still connected to the firmament above. In the long nights ahead, these instruments will be touched again and again, like beads on a rosary, each measurement a prayer disguised as calculation, each reading a candle of certainty in the dark. Perhaps, as you drift now toward your own sleep, you may think of these tools not as relics of history, but as metaphors for our own wandering. For we too carry our astrolabes and quadrants within us, the small ways we measure our place against the immensity of life. We too count time in grains of sand, hold on to ropes that slip through our hands and seek stars to tell us where we are. And in that, perhaps, we are not so different from the sailors of 1492, who looked upward and downward with equal wonder, trusting that fragile tools might be enough to touch the sky. Morning rises slowly over Palos, and with the first streaks of pale light, the three ships begin to stir as though they were living beings shaking off dreams. Ropes are tightened, sails unfurled, anchors heaved up from the depths with groaning effort, and the harbour that had cradled them so tenderly gives them away to the open mouth of the sea. There is no thunderous farewell, no cheering crowd, only the cry of gulls startled from their perches, the creak of timbers under strain, and the muffled thud of boots as sailors hurry about their tasks. Soon the coastline falls behind, the small whitewashed houses of Palos shrinking into the haze, until at last only a faint line of land remains, and then even that dissolves into the horizon's grey-blue seam. For the sailors, this is the moment when the world begins to feel unfamiliar, not because of what they see, but because of what they no longer see. Land has always been the silent companion of a voyage, a reassuring shape that reminds men of return, but now that shape has vanished, and with it the certainty of direction, some men cross themselves quietly, whispering prayers as if they might tether faith in place of earth. Others laugh a little too loudly, making jests about sea monsters lurking just beyond sight, though their eyes wander nervously across the empty water as they say it. One sailor claims he saw a tail flick just beneath the surface, long and silver like the sweep of a sword. Another insists it was only a dolphin, but admits that even dolphins, when glimpsed out of the corner of the eye, can stir a man's imagination more than any sermon. Life on board begins to settle into rhythm almost immediately, for the sea allows no idleness. Watches are divided into shifts, bells ring with solemn patience, and men are assigned their tasks, some trimming sails, others bailing water, still others attending to the ropes that seem never to rest. Meals are taken at intervals dictated less by appetite than by routine. Hard bread, or hardtack, is the staple, baked so thoroughly that it resists even the gnawing of teeth, a kind of edible stone meant to last months without spoiling. Sailors soften it by dipping it in wine or soaking it in the broth of salted fish, though sometimes it breaks teeth before it yields. Humour arises here too, for the men joke that the cook's true profession is not feeding them, but testing the strength of their jaws. A few even claim that should they encounter any hostile creatures of the sea, their best weapon would not be sword or spear, but a loaf of the cook's bread hurled with accuracy. Alongside the hard bread, salted cod and pork are rationed, their flavours muted but their presence comforting in their predictability. Barrels of wine and water are tapped sparingly, each measure watched carefully to ensure there will be enough weeks hence. Lentils and chickpeas appear occasionally, boiled into thick stews that cling to wooden bowls, while olive oil, vinegar and cheese offer small comforts, fleeting reminders of the lands they left behind. The smell of these meals blends with the omnipresent scent of tar, salt and damp wood, creating an atmosphere that is neither unpleasant nor inviting, but simply the scent of survival. At night, the sailors sling their hammocks or rest upon planks, lulled not by silence but by the continuous song of the ship itself. The masts creak like old voices speaking through the dark, the sails whisper as they catch the breeze, and the sea splashes against the hull in endless patterns, steady and repetitive, like a lullaby played on water. Some men snore, their breaths blending with the ship's rhythm, while others remain awake, gazing upward at the stars that now stretch across the sky in a brilliance rarely seen from land. For many, the sight is both awe-inspiring and unsettling, for the stars seem endless, crowding the heavens with light, suggesting a vastness to match the sea's own. Yet within that vastness lies comfort, for the north star, steady and fixed, shines like an anchor of certainty in the drifting night. Columbus himself does not rest easily. He writes by lantern light in his journal, recording distances by dead reckoning, keeping one account for the sailors, modest and reassuring, and another more accurate for himself. This double reckoning, as it will later be called, is less deception than balm, for he knows that numbers, if too large, can stir despair as surely as hunger or thirst. To the men, he reports fewer miles each day than they have truly travelled, so that the ocean may seem smaller, the journey less daunting, the endlessness less endless. One might call it trickery, yet in its way it is also kindness, a leader's attempt to shorten the horizon of fear. If you picture him there, hunched over parchment, the quill scratching faintly while the lantern trembles with each sway of the ship, you may sense not cunning but a quiet compassion, a desire to hold the crew's faith together as carefully as he holds the ink from spilling. During these first days, talk among the sailors drifts between the ordinary and the extraordinary. They grumble about food, jest about the captain's peculiar devotion to his charts, and occasionally argue over whose turn it is to scrub the deck. Yet in quieter moments they whisper of what lies beyond, the fabled islands of Chipango, the shores of Cathay, or perhaps the edge of the world itself. Some recall stories told by their grandfathers, of seas where the water boiled, of beasts that swallowed ships whole, of skies that darkened with storms no man could endure. They laugh as they tell it, but their laughter fades quickly, replaced by silence as they glance out into the dark, where water and sky meet with no interruption. And so the first days at sea pass, not with grand events, but with the slow weaving of routine, the stitching of courage into the fabric of daily life. The men learn to listen to the sea's many voices, to measure time not by clocks but by bells and sand, to endure the hardness of bread and the saltiness of fish with humour, and to find in the endless sky both fear and consolation. For you, listening now, perhaps you can feel that rhythm settling upon you as well. A reminder that journeys, whether across oceans or into sleep, do not leap from beginning to end, but move patiently, step by step, wave by wave, breath by breath. And so, as night deepens once more, the ships sail steadily westward, their sails full, their crews murmuring and singing in low voices, their captain writing quietly by flickering light. The voyage has begun not with wonders but with the ordinary, and in the ordinary lies the strength to face the extraordinary. The sea, immense and unchanging, carries them gently, and perhaps it carries you too toward the calm horizon of dreams. The morning after departure carries with it a strangeness that no amount of routine can disguise. The ships move westward with sails stretched, the harbour of Palos already vanished behind them, and by midday the coast of Spain itself grows smaller, fainter, as though retreating not only from sight but from memory. The men gather along the rails to watch, some leaning silently, their faces unreadable, others standing with arms crossed as though bracing against a wind that has not yet come. A few laugh loudly, pointing out familiar hills or church towers, as if naming them could keep them alive in the distance, yet the laughter rings hollow and fades quickly. For every man knows that when the land disappears entirely, when the last line of earth dissolves into horizon, they will be left only with sky and sea, with nothing solid to remind them that the world is more than water. One sailor refuses to look back at all. He busies himself with coiling rope and checking knots, muttering that he has no need for farewells, that land will be waiting when they return. Another older and more weathered cannot tear his gaze away. He watches until the shore is no more than a shadow, then until the shadow itself melts into mist, and finally until nothing remains but the trembling line where ocean meets sky. Only then does he sigh, a sound so deep that it seems to rise not from his chest but from years of voyages past, and turn back to his work with hands that suddenly look older. Between these two men, the one who refuses to look and the one who cannot stop looking, you can sense the two hearts of the voyage, denial and longing, both fragile, both human. By late afternoon, the ships are surrounded entirely by water. The horizon is a perfect circle, no feature breaking its symmetry, no mountain or tree to remind them of direction. To the untrained eye, it might feel as though the world itself had been erased, leaving only sea below and sky above. A silence falls among the men then, not total but heavy, the kind of silence that grows louder because it carries what no one dares to say. They fear not monsters yet, nor storms, but the endlessness itself, the suspicion that they have slipped into a dream from which return may not be possible. It is Columbus who breaks the spell, calling for the men to sing. The sailors hesitate at first, their voices low and uncertain, but gradually they join, one after another, until the air is filled with rough harmony. The song is not polished, not beautiful in any formal sense, but it carries with it the warmth of shared breath, the comfort of rhythm against the shapeless sea. Their voices rise and fall like waves themselves, carrying verses of old prayers, fragments of folk songs, chants meant to keep the pulling of ropes steady. As they sing, the silence retreats, and fear loosens its grip. The ocean is still vast, still without end, but now it has company, the sound of men refusing to be swallowed by quiet. Imagine standing there with them, leaning against the rail, hearing the voices blend into the wind. The sea stretches outward in all directions, a silver blue plain that shifts constantly yet never changes. Above, the sky is wide and merciless, the sun sinking slowly, staining the water gold. The sails billow and snap, the ropes groan, the deck creaks beneath your feet, and all around the horizon remains stubbornly featureless. You might feel, as they do, the sensation of stepping into fog with no return, each mile erasing the chance of turning back, each hour pushing you deeper into a place that cannot be undone. The men find ways to soften this reality with humour, for humour has always been the sailor's companion. One jokes that perhaps the land has grown tired of them and has hidden itself until they learn better manners. Another mutters that he already misses the wine of Palos more than he misses his family, drawing laughter that is too loud but necessary. A third swears that the sea is alive, and that if they keep staring at it, it will stare back, which prompts a quick retort that he should be careful not to look too long, lest the sea find his face unappealing and spit him back at shore. The jokes are rough, sometimes sharp, but they are better than silence, for silence feeds fear while laughter starves it. That first night without land is both unsettling and strangely beautiful. When darkness falls, the ship seems smaller than ever, fragile lanterns adrift upon an ocean that stretches forever, yet in the same breath, the sky reveals itself in ways the men had never seen from land. Stars ignite across the heavens, countless and brilliant, their reflections trembling faintly in the water. Sailors point upward with awe, whispering names they half remember from stories. Orion, the hunter, Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and always Polaris, the North Star, steady and unwavering. For men who have lost land, the stars become a new kind of earth, distant but reliable, a reminder that not all anchors are buried in soil. Columbus walks the deck quietly, listening to the voices, watching the stars, marking in his mind the progress of the voyage. He knows that faith is as necessary as sails, that courage is as vital as food, and so he encourages the men to sing again, to keep their eyes upon the heavens rather than the emptiness of the sea. Perhaps he too feels the weight of that endless horizon, but if so, he carries it silently, offering instead the certainty of his presence, a certainty the men desperately need. As the ships press forward through the night, the last trace of land is gone, yet something else begins to take its place. A rhythm emerges, a quiet acknowledgement that they are no longer men tied to the shore, but men of the sea, bound now to water and sky. Their songs linger, their laughter fades into murmurs, and gradually the crew settles into a kind of uneasy acceptance. The voyage has shifted from departure to crossing, from farewell to endurance, and perhaps, as you drift with them in your imagination, you too feel the transformation. The land of your day slips away, the noise of your thoughts fades into horizon, and you are carried onward by rhythm and song, moving steadily into the wide, uncharted waters of rest. The coast has faded, yes, but in its place lies the vast ocean of dreams, waiting to be crossed. Night arrives like a slow tide of velvet, and with it the ships take on a quieter life, the day's practical urgency softening into the hush that settles when canvas has found its proper angle and the wind holds steady, when the sea becomes a patient companion rather than a test, and when men, finished with the noisy labours of hauling, mending, scrubbing and stowing, finally allow their eyes to climb away from the planks and ropes toward the higher architecture of the sky. Up there, beyond the reach of masts and shrouds, the stars reveal themselves with a generosity that land rarely permits, thousands upon thousands, like salt scattered across black slate, and the Milky Way spills its pale river from horizon to horizon, so vividly that even the most seasoned sailor, who has counted knots in ropes and grains of sand in hourglasses, must pause to admit that numbers have their limits when beauty exceeds measure. If you lie back with them upon the deck, a coil of rope for a pillow and a folded cloak for warmth, you will feel the ship's slow breathing pass through your spine, the timbers rising and falling with such regular rhythm that your own chest begins to match it, and as your breath steadies with the ship's, the sky seems to drift closer, not like a ceiling pressing down, but like a friendly map unrolled above the world for the night alone. The sailors point softly, not with the sharpness of instruction, but with the tenderness of memory, tracing figures that have guided them since their first voyages. There, the hunter, with his belt 3 bright sparks in a row. There, the Great Bear turning through seasons like a careful wheel, and always, unwavering and steady, the North Star, which does not cross the sky like its cousins, but keeps its quiet watch as if it were a nail hammered into the firmament, holding the night in place. Columbus, who spends as much time listening to the stars as he does watching them, does not describe these lights with numbers in moments like this, because to speak of degrees and altitudes would feel like raising a fence around a meadow. Instead, he speaks softly of how the North Star sits just so above the rim of the world, and how, when its height appears to rise or fall, a man may sense that he has wandered north or south, not as a scholar measures with instruments, but as a shepherd knows his hill by its slope underfoot. Celestial navigation becomes, in this quiet, less a lesson and more a lullaby, a way of telling time with the music of light, a way of confirming place with the feel of familiarity, and the men who earlier turned the quadrant and astrolabe with anxious care now find that simply lying beneath the constellations grants a steadier wisdom, the kind that seeps in through the eyes and settles where fear would otherwise make its home. Sometimes, a thin path of pale green sparks appears along the wake, a line of sea fire curved like a feather across the dark, a gift from unseen creatures that glow when the water disturbs them, and the sailors laugh softly that the ocean, jealous of the heavens, has learned to keep a few stars for itself, trailing them behind like a child refusing to surrender its toys at bedtime. Phosphorescence drifts into the men's talk as easily as myths, and on these nights, when deck and sky are both strewn with lights, the voyage feels less like an intrusion into the unknown, and more like passage through a world that has been waiting for quiet feet. There is humour here too, tender and light enough not to pierce the calm, for one sailor claims that the middle star of the hunter's belt owes him money, and is hiding among the others, while another insists that the 7 bright points of the bear are actually the cook's ladle, which explains why the soup tastes like it has been stirred by a cloud. A third vows with unnecessary solemnity that he has adopted a small, faint star above the mast and will use it to navigate directly to a better wine cellar than the one kept below deck. Their jokes are gentle in the night air, rising and falling with the same cadence as the wind, and you can feel how laughter, when kept small and warm, can be another kind of navigation, a way of steering the mind away from shadows. As the watches turn, the deck becomes a place of quiet observation rather than labour. A man on the starboard side, his cloak gathered close at the throat, listens for the slight change in the wind that a more anxious crew might miss, and in his pauses he studies the faint tilt of the North Star above the dark line of the sea, finding in its constancy a comfort that no speech could produce. Another, seated near the mainmast, traces constellations on a scrap of wood with a bit of charcoal, not for science or charts, but because it pleases him to carry in his pocket a small sky of his own making, a talisman against troubled thoughts. The ship's bell, struck quietly to mark the turning of the glass, answers the hush with a tone so familiar it seems to have existed before the voyage, as if the bell itself remembers the last time men looked up and found courage there. When the need arises to make a more careful reading, the act itself remains tender. A sailor steadies the quadrant while another aligns the edge with the star's height, and the plumb line sways like a pendulum of moonlight, whispering its reading across the engraved wood. Yet even as numbers are spoken, they arrive like distant footfalls, not intruding upon the silence so much as sharing it, a reminder that knowledge can move gently when guided by reverence. Columbus notes the result with a short scratch of quill, but he lingers afterward, face lifted, as if to confirm that the ink has written what the heart already knew, that they are not lost, that they are being led across the water by a chain of small fires set in heaven. The sky teaches patience as much as direction, for stars do not hurry to their posts, and constellations do not wheel faster to comfort anxious men. Instead, the heavens move at the pace they have always chosen, and the sailor's breathing learns to match that pace, drawing out of them the fidgets of the day and replacing those quick, cramped inhales with long, even tides of air. In this way, the night becomes a teacher of 2 lessons at once. The first, that position on the ocean can be guessed by the angle of Polaris and the memory of constellations, and the second, that hearts can be steadied by surrendering to the grand, unrushed choreography of the sky. If you let your eyes wander with theirs, you will find your mind smoothing itself like cloth pulled flat by careful hands, your thoughts stacking neatly like folded sails, and your worries, so loud on land, taking one step back and then another, until they stand at the rail and watch quietly, unwilling to interrupt. The ship continues on, a small moving island under a cathedral of stars, and the miles pass not as numbers in a ledger, but as breaths counted in contentment, each exhale leaving a little more space inside you for rest. And when at last the bell marks the change of watch and men trade warm cloaks and easy smiles, the sky remains, still crowded with its tender lights, a faithful ceiling over the ocean's sleeping face. The ships glide forward, and perhaps you glide with them, tucked into your own hammock of thought, rocking on the slow tide of night, following the soft breadcrumbs of starlight laid across the dark. By the 3rd and 4th days, the ships begin to find their rhythm, and with them the men begin to find theirs. At first, every creak of timber or snap of canvas had seemed like an intrusion, a sudden reminder that the world beneath their feet was not stone but water, unsteady and deep. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, these noises merge into music, and the crew learns to live within its measures. The ship becomes not simply a vessel, but a great wooden instrument, playing its daily voice with ropes for strings, sails for drums, and the sea itself as the endless bow that draws sound from silence. Each morning begins with the bell, its tone cutting softly through the mist of sleep, not harsh, but steady, reminding each man where he belongs in the rotation of watchers. The bell does not ask politely, yet it does not shout either. It simply rings, and the men obey, rising to their feet, stretching weary limbs, and climbing to their posts. Water is hauled, buckets splashing against the planks, the cool spray dampening the air, masts creak as ropes are hauled tighter, sails adjusted to please the wind. The smell of tar, wood and salt mingles with the lingering odours of last night's stew, forming a perfume that is neither pleasant nor foul, but wholly of the sea, impossible to mistake for anything else. If you listen carefully, you will hear how the ship's sounds are layered like verses in a chant. The high notes belong to the rigging, thin ropes that whistle or groan depending on how the wind catches them. The middle notes are the masts themselves, tall and resonant, sighing with each tilt. The low notes are the planks underfoot, drumming faintly as waves strike and retreat, steady as a heartbeat. Above it all, human voices weave in, a muttered curse, a barked order, a sudden burst of laughter. It is not a song of beauty in the ordinary sense, but it is a song nonetheless, one that will play for weeks without pause. During these hours of routine, small vignettes of humanity emerge like shells scattered on a shore. One sailor, seated cross-legged near the forecastle, takes out a knife and a scrap of wood. With slow, deliberate cuts, he begins to carve a charm, perhaps a cross, perhaps a small figure of a bird, something to carry in his pocket during storms. Another leans against the rail, humming softly to himself, the tune too low to identify but steady enough to comfort. A third writes clumsy letters upon a scrap of parchment, words to a wife who cannot possibly receive them until long after he has returned, if he returns at all, yet he writes anyway, as though the very act of forming the letters is a kind of prayer. The sea, for its part, adds its own language. Sometimes the waves strike the hull with sharp slaps, impatient as drum beats. At other times they roll gently, stroking the ship with the tenderness of a mother rocking a cradle. Rain arrives unannounced, pattering against canvas and wood until everything glistens, and then, as quickly as it began, the rain drifts away, leaving behind a deck that smells newly washed. The ocean's voice is never silent, only shifting from verse to verse, repeating refrains with endless variation. Meals break the monotony, though not always with pleasure. The cook, a man with more determination than talent, ladles out thick stews of lentils and peas, their surfaces broken by the occasional shred of salted pork. The bread, as always, is as hard as rope knots, and the men soften it with wine or water before daring to chew. Complaints are constant yet good-natured, for to grumble at the food is safer than to grumble at the sea. One sailor declares that the stew has been cooked so long it now considers itself part of the family, while another swears that if the bread survives the voyage it will return home to serve as bricks for his chimney. Their laughter fills the air, brief but real, and in those moments the ocean's voice seems to join them, the waves slapping against the hull in rhythm with their amusement. At night, when watches change and the stars rise into their appointed stations, the daily voice of the ocean softens but does not vanish. The creak of the mast becomes deeper, slower, like the voice of an elder telling a story. The ropes murmur in the wind, less strained now, as if the ship itself has exhaled after a long day. The waves hush their tones, no longer drumming with urgency but swaying gently, lulling both ship and crew into uneasy rest. Even the men's breathing becomes part of the chorus, hammocks swinging in rhythm, snores blending with the sigh of the wind. Columbus listens to all of this as carefully as he listens to his charts. To him, the daily voice of the sea is both warning and comfort. He notes when the rhythm changes, when the masts complain too loudly, when the waves speak with greater force, yet he also allows himself to rest in it, for he knows that without this constant song, the silence would be unbearable. To lead men across emptiness requires not only knowledge of stars and maps, but also an ear for the music of routine, for it is routine that holds fear at bay. Imagine yourself lying in a hammock beneath the deck, the wood groaning softly above you, the air thick with the mingled scents of tar, smoke and salt. Every sway of the ship cradles you deeper, every sound joins into the great chorus, the splash of a bucket, the murmur of men, the sigh of sails, the endless whisper of the ocean. You may feel your own breathing fall into rhythm with it, slow and steady, a tide moving through you. The daily voice of the sea becomes, in time, your own. And so the voyage continues, not marked by grand events or sudden revelations, but by the steady weaving of sound into memory. Each day is a verse, each night a refrain, and together they form the long, patient song of the Atlantic. The men may not always love it, may sometimes curse its monotony, but they cannot deny that it carries them forward, wave by wave, heartbeat by heartbeat, toward horizons yet unseen. There comes a time, not many days into the crossing, when the sea decides to withdraw its voice. After days of steady breezes and obedient sails, the air begins to hesitate, the gusts lose their confidence, and at last the wind vanishes altogether. The sails, once swollen and proud, collapse into slack folds, heavy as blankets hung out to dry, their canvas drooping and flapping weakly with each shift of the ship's body. The ropes no longer strain, the masts no longer groan, and the ship itself begins to drift aimlessly, carried only by the slow breath of the currents. It is as if the ocean, having sung to them without pause, suddenly grows tired of conversation and decides to sit in silence, leaving the men to listen to their own thoughts. The first hours of calm feel almost pleasant, like a pause in a song where the listener inhales deeply. The water lies smooth as polished stone, a mirror broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish near the surface. The horizon, usually alive with the movement of clouds, now seems painted, fixed in place, as though the world itself has forgotten how to turn. The sailors lean over the rails, marvelling at the stillness, tossing small scraps into the sea just to watch the circles widen and fade. Some laugh that they have found at last the legendary edge of the world. Not a cliff tumbling into darkness, but a flat, endless calm where time itself refuses to continue. Yet as the hours stretch into days, the silence begins to grow heavy. Without the rhythm of the sails snapping or the timbers groaning, the men feel unmoored, as though their own bodies no longer know when to wake, when to work, when to rest. The bell still strikes its notes, the hourglass still empties and is turned again, but the measures feel hollow, disconnected from any true progress. The ship drifts a little east, a little west, and then not at all, and the ocean's surface shines with a kind of merciless serenity, a blank face that gives nothing away. Fear creeps in quietly, not with shouts or cries, but with murmurs exchanged in the shadow of the masts. If the wind does not return, they whisper, the voyage could stretch into forever. Water barrels emptied, food stores dwindling, hope withering like sails left too long in sun. No storm is needed to destroy them. The absence of storm is enough. Silence, heavier than thunder, can sink a ship just as surely as waves. Columbus walks among them with measured calm, offering words of reassurance, reminding them that the ocean is never still for long, that winds wander but always return, that patience is a sailor's greatest virtue, yet even he feels the weight of the quiet pressing in. At night he sits with his journal, quill poised above parchment, uncertain what distance to write. For the truth is that no distance has been made at all. He invents figures to keep the log alive, but he knows that numbers cannot disguise immobility, and that hope must be nourished with more than ink. The men, restless with idleness, invent their own distractions. Some gamble with carved dice, slapping them down upon overturned barrels and arguing loudly over whose luck has been stolen by Neptune. Others sing, though their voices rise more in defiance than joy, trying to fill the void left by the absent wind. A few polish knives, mend clothing or carve charms, tasks they might otherwise postpone, but here they seize any excuse to keep their hands busy. One sailor ties knots endlessly in a length of rope, creating patterns with no purpose other than to unmake them again, as though imitating the ocean's eternal repetition. Humour, brittle yet stubborn, becomes their weapon against the silence. One man complains that the barrels of wine seem to evaporate faster when the ship stands still, suggesting that perhaps the sea itself has grown thirsty and is drinking from their stores. Another swears that he saw a seagull land upon the mast and shake its head in pity, as if mocking their predicament. A third insists that if they remain here long enough, the cook's bread will grow so hard it can be stacked to build a causeway all the way back to Spain. Their laughter is sharp, a little forced, but even strained mirth is better than none, and for a few moments at a time it pierces the silence like sunlight breaking through clouds. At night the calm becomes uncanny. The stars shine brighter than ever, their reflections doubling upon the mirror of the sea, so that it feels as though the ship floats between two skies, one above and one below, endless in both directions. The men lie awake, unsettled by the perfection of it, longing for the sound of waves or the tug of wind, for something to prove that the world is still alive. Even sleep is uneasy, for the hammocks sway only faintly, lacking the steady rocking that usually cradles them. Dreams feel sharper, heavier, filled with images of land just beyond reach, of breezes that vanish when grasped, of horizons that recede into themselves like mirrors. And yet, within the silence, there is also strange beauty. To stand upon the deck and gaze outward is to see the ocean as glass, an unbroken sheet stretching to infinity. The air tastes clearer, the stars reveal constellations unnoticed before, and the heart, once it ceases to fight the stillness, begins to match its calm. The doldrums are not only terror but also invitation, to breathe more slowly, to feel the weight of each moment, to exist without movement. Perhaps the sea, in her wisdom, knows that men rush too easily, and so she pauses them, holds them in her still palm until they remember how to wait. Columbus, in his rare moments of solitude, senses this lesson. Though he prays for wind as fervently as any man, he also allows himself to marvel at the silence, to imagine that the ocean has stopped not in cruelty but in contemplation, as though testing the faith of those who would cross her. He looks upward at the stars, then downward at their reflections, and feels for an instant that he is suspended between two infinities, a single mortal line drawn between heaven and water. For you, drifting alongside them now, perhaps the doldrums carry no fear, only rest. Imagine lying upon the deck, the air warm and unmoving, the sea flat as polished glass, the stars so bright that they seem to lean closer to hear your breathing. There is no rush, no urgency, no demand for movement, only the stillness of a world that has chosen for a time to stop. And in that pause you may find your own body pausing too, your thoughts slowing, your breath deepening, until you, like the ships, float weightless, waiting for the next breeze of dream. When the winds at last return, Carrying the ships forward once more, the men breathe easier, though the sea has already marked them with the memory of silence. They move about their duties with renewed vigour, the canvas filling with sound again, ropes straining, sails snapping like banners shaken awake, and beneath all of it the voices of the crew rising once more into the air. These voices, some rough, some clear, some young, some cracked by years of salt and labour, form the truest map of the voyage. They are not the lines drawn on Columbus's charts, nor the numbers written in his log, but the living chorus that gives shape to the journey. Each man has his own note in this chorus, and if you linger long enough on deck you can learn to tell them apart. There is Martin Alonso Pinzon, captain of the Pinta, whose voice is strong and commanding, carrying across the waves like a trumpet even when he speaks in ordinary tones. He's a man accustomed to being heard, accustomed to the respect his reputation demands, and when he calls orders the sailors respond quickly, their movements sharpened by trust in his confidence. Beside him, his brother Vicente, captain of the Nina, speaks with a quieter authority, his words chosen carefully, never wasted. Where Martin's voice is a wave crashing against rocks, Vicente's is a steady current beneath, subtle but persistent, guiding without spectacle. Together they balance one another, a duet of leadership that steadies the smaller ships. On the Santa Maria, the flagship, voices mingle in a more varied tapestry. One sailor, young and eager, cannot pass a task without humming some tune, his melodies drifting like ribbons through the rigging. Another, older and more grizzled, punctuates his sentences with laughter, a deep gravelly chuckle that carries even when no one else finds reason to smile. A third spends his idle moments sketching stars onto scraps of parchment, not with precision, but with childlike wonder, as if trying to capture pieces of the heavens to carry in his pocket. His companions tease him, calling him an astronomer of ink, but when storms darken the sky, they secretly glance at his drawings as though they might reveal a hidden comfort. The common sailors bring with them stories as varied as their faces. One recalls fields of olives in Andalusia and tells anyone who will listen how the trees there seem to whisper secrets in the wind. Another speaks often of his wife and children, repeating their names like a litany, as though saying them aloud could tether him to the shore. A third, a quiet man from Galicia, rarely speaks at all, but when he does, his words carry the weight of thought, like pebbles dropped carefully into water, rippling long after the sound has faded. Not all voices carry solemnity. Some are shaped purely for humour, for easing the heaviness of days that stretch long and monotonous. A sailor with a missing tooth makes a game of exaggerating his whistles, producing shrill notes that mimic birds or echo the squeal of ropes, drawing laughter even from the weary. Another invents riddles so absurd that they resist solution, claiming, for example, that the sea is secretly a great cloak stitched by angels, and daring his companions to prove him wrong. They cannot, of course, and so the laughter continues, filling the gaps between labour. Humour on a voyage is not merely entertainment, it is ballast, steadying the hearts of men as surely as the ship's keel steadies its body. In the evenings, when the day's labour softens into watchfulness, voices grow gentler. Stories rise into the air, drifting like smoke from lanterns. One sailor recounts a childhood adventure. Another repeats a legend of dragons that live in caves far beneath the sea, their breath rising as storms, their movements stirring currents. A third swears he once glimpsed a city beneath the waves, towers of coral glimmering in sunlight, though his companions accuse him of confusing reality with the bottom of his wine cup. Still, the tale is told again, and even the doubters listen, for stories, true or false, are nourishment in a place where bread crumbles and meat spoils. Columbus himself is not always among them during these hours, yet his presence is felt. When he speaks, it is with the measured cadence of one who knows words must not only instruct but also inspire. His Castilian carries a trace of Genoese accent, reminding the men that he too is an outsider in certain ways, but his voice holds conviction, and conviction is a sound men will follow even when the horizon offers no reassurance. They may grumble about him in whispers, about his relentless faith, his insistence on distances that seem too small, his habit of staring at charts as if they were holy relics. But when he speaks of their purpose, of the riches and honours awaiting them, his words ring like iron struck upon stone, steady, undeniable. If you pause to listen beyond the words themselves, you will hear the ship's voice weaving into theirs, the sigh of sails as punctuation, the creak of the mast as emphasis, the splash of water against hull as rhythm. Together, men and vessel form a single conversation, each answering the other, each dependent upon the other. Voices on the wind are not only those spoken by human mouths, but also those carried by canvas and rope, by timber and tide. Imagine yourself standing among them, the lantern light painting soft arcs upon the deck, the air heavy with the mingled scents of pitch and salt, the men's voices rising and falling like waves. Some speak with laughter, some with longing, some with command, some with silence, yet together they create a harmony that is larger than any one of them. You are surrounded not by strangers, but by companions in sound, each one contributing a thread to the great tapestry of the voyage. And perhaps, as you close your eyes, you can carry those voices with you, the laughter that resists despair, the hum that softens labour, the story that distracts from hunger, the command that steadies fear. They are the true wind of the journey, invisible yet powerful, pushing the ships forward across the unknown. Without them the sails would hang empty, but with them the Atlantic becomes not a void but a stage upon which human voices rise, fragile and brave, to fill the silence. As the days lengthen into weeks, the great voyage reveals itself not only in the expanse of ocean crossed or the distance measured in charts, but in the quiet rituals of eating, praying and finding comfort in the smallest of gestures. For all the grandeur of maps and the lofty talk of discovering new worlds, survival often reduces itself to the taste of a bowl of stew, the warmth of a whispered prayer, or the laughter shared over something as unremarkable as a loaf of stale bread. Meals on board are simple, even crude, yet they carry with them the rhythm of life, marking time as surely as the bell and the hourglass. Each morning begins with portions of hardtack, that infamous bread baked so fiercely it resists both mould and teeth. Its texture is more stone than food, a hardness that refuses to yield without soaking. Sailors dip it into wine when they can spare it, or soften it in the broth of salted fish, waiting until it crumbles enough to chew. There is humour here, always, for men will laugh at what they cannot change. One jokes that the bread was not baked but forged, hammered on an anvil by the blacksmith before being loaded aboard. Another claims that if thrown with enough force, it could put a hole through the side of the ship, and he demonstrates by tossing a crust across the deck where it clatters loudly and nearly startles a gull. Their laughter, even as they chew, transforms the meagre into the bearable. Salted cod and pork appear often, their flavour sharp and wearying, yet welcome in their ability to sustain. Lentils and chickpeas provide variation, boiled into stews thick enough to cling stubbornly to wooden spoons. Cheese, vinegar, and olive oil make rare appearances, small luxuries savoured in silence. The cook, ever a target of complaint, accepts the jokes at his expense with a shrug, stirring his cauldron as though it were not a stew of peas and salt, but a potion capable of keeping men alive. In truth it is, for without his humble fare the voyage would have ended long before the horizon promised land. Wine is rationed carefully, a comfort as much as a necessity. Shared in small cups, it becomes less about quenching thirst than about ceremony, a reminder of land and home. Men sip slowly, savouring not only the taste but the memory it awakens, vineyards under the Spanish sun, laughter in taverns, weddings and feasts where music played and bread was soft. Sometimes they passed the wineskin from hand to hand, each man taking a sip before sending it along, the gesture less about the liquid than the bond it reinforces. The sea may isolate them, but in that circle of sharing they are gathered again into community. Faith, too, has its place woven into the fabric of these days. At dawn and dusk men bow their heads, whispering prayers as naturally as they haul ropes or strike the bell. Some carry small crucifixes carved from wood, worn smooth by years of touch. Others recite verses learned in childhood, their voices low, steady, sometimes trembling. Columbus himself leads prayers on occasion, his voice solemn beneath the vastness of the sky, reminding the crew that their venture is not only an earthly gamble but, in his conviction, a divine mission. For him, the ocean is not chaos but design, a path laid by God, and though some sailors scoff quietly, others cling to his certainty as they cling to the ropes in a storm. Rituals of luck arise alongside rituals of faith, for men at sea know that superstition can carry hope where reason cannot. One sailor rubs a small charm before each meal, a carved figure shaped vaguely like a bird. Another insists that the first ladle of stew must always be poured overboard, as an offering to the waves. A third, more playful, claims that every time a gull lands on the mast it brings news of home, though when pressed he admits the gulls mostly bring the smell of fish. Still, the rituals persist, half believed, half jested, but wholly necessary, for they stitch courage into the long days when horizon and sea remain unchanging. Even small comforts take on significance. A song hummed quietly during labour becomes more soothing than rest. A scrap of cloth tied around a wrist reminds a sailor of his mother's blessing. A simple game of dice carved from bone distracts from hunger and monotony. On one occasion, a sailor swears he sees a mermaid off the bow, her hair glistening in moonlight, her arms beckoning, only for laughter to erupt when the supposed enchantress reveals herself to be a drifting log tangled with seaweed. The story, retold for days, becomes a source of amusement, each retelling more exaggerated than the last, until the mermaid is described as carrying a comb of gold and singing so poorly that even the gulls fled. Humour here does more than pass the time. It shields the men from despair. At night, after meals and prayers, the crew settles into hammocks or onto the deck, lanterns swaying gently above them. The ocean whispers against the hull, steady and patient, and the men, weary from labour, close their eyes to the familiar smells of smoke, salt, and tar. Within these modest routines lies the true strength of the voyage, not in the grandeur of discovery, but in the quiet endurance of human beings who find ways to laugh, to hope, to comfort one another, even as the ocean surrounds them with nothing but endlessness. Imagine yourself there, holding a piece of bread that resists your bite, laughing with the others as you dunk it into stew, passing the wineskin from hand to hand beneath a sky where stars blaze like unseen fires. You hear the prayers murmured at dawn, the dice rattling against wood, the sighs of men remembering home. These are not the grand moments of history, not the proclamations of kings or the strokes of pens across maps, but they are the heartbeats of the voyage. Without them, the ships would be empty shells drifting westward. With them, they are living vessels, carrying not only sails and timbers, but humanity itself across the wide Atlantic. When the ship grows quiet in the hours between watches, when the laughter has subsided into murmurs and even the gulls have fallen silent, there is one figure who remains wakeful more often than the rest. Columbus, commander of the voyage, yet also its most restless passenger, can often be found seated near the glow of a lantern, his face drawn into lines of thought, his hand moving steadily across parchment. He writes not only for record, but for survival, for in the act of placing ink upon the page he wrestles the chaos of sea and sky into an order he can hold. The journal before him carries 2 sets of reckonings, though only one will ever be read by the men. By day, when he announces their progress, he reports a number that comforts, a distance that seems manageable, a path that feels within reach. By night, in the private reckoning of his heart, he records the true measure, longer, harder, stretching further westward into the unknown. It's as though he keeps two sets of footprints upon the sand, one neat, visible, assuring those who follow, and another hidden, showing the true wandering path. This double reckoning is not merely a trick, but a kind of mercy, for he knows that men cannot carry both truth and hope when truth grows too heavy. Imagine him bent over the journal, the lantern swaying gently with the ship, shadows sliding across his face as though the sea itself were writing alongside him. The scratch of his quill becomes part of the ship's nocturnal music, a counterpoint to the groan of the timbers and the sigh of the wind. His inkstains resemble small constellations scattered across the page, black stars anchoring the voyage in memory. Each mark is a promise that their wandering is not meaningless, that someone is watching, measuring, remembering. At times his thoughts wander from numbers to prayer. He whispers verses under his breath, crossing himself with hands still smelling faintly of salt and pitch. For Columbus, faith is not a cloak worn for appearances, but a fire stoked constantly. His conviction that God himself has guided him onto this path. He believes that Asia lies just beyond the horizon, that the riches of the Indies await, but more than gold or spices, he believes the voyage holds a divine purpose, a step in the great unfolding of history. Whether this conviction is truth or illusion, it gives him a steadiness that others borrow without even realizing. Yet, he is not without doubt. In the long hours of darkness, when the ocean lies heavy and still, he feels the weight of responsibility press upon him like an anchor. The faces of the men rise in his mind, the young sailor humming as he coiled rope, the older one whispering his children's names, the captains who share his command yet also challenge it. They have trusted him to lead them into waters no European has crossed in such a way, and though he speaks boldly by day, by night he wonders what hand he holds them in, his own, or God's, or perhaps both. Solitude of leadership is not that one walks alone, but that one must carry the fears of many without showing them in one's own eyes. There are moments too of small humour, even here. One evening, as Columbus dipped his quill, a sailor stumbled past muttering that the only thing longer than the voyage would be the captain's journal, since surely no sea could stretch as far as his endless scratching. Columbus allowed himself a rare smile, knowing that jest, even aimed at him, was proof of life, proof of courage still flickering among the crew. Another time he overheard a man declare that the captain must have a secret map that only reveals itself under moonlight, for how else could he remain so certain of direction? Columbus chuckled quietly to himself, thinking how strange it was that certainty, even when born of faith rather than fact, could be mistaken for hidden knowledge. The lantern burns low, the oil within thinning, yet still he writes. His words not poetry, yet they carry their own cadence, the rhythm of distance measured against the heart. He notes the stars observed, the winds recorded, the leagues estimated. Between the lines, though, slip other thoughts, the longing for home, the ache of uncertainty, the awe at the endless face of the sea. These are not always written, yet they live in the pauses, in the way his quill hesitates before beginning another word. If you lean close in imagination, you might hear him exhale, slow and steady, a breath that carries not despair, but weariness, the kind that comes when one carries a vision too large for a single chest. His eyes close for a moment, then open again, fixed upon the lantern's flame. Outside, the ocean breathes around the hull, steady as ever, indifferent to his reckonings. Above, the stars wheel slowly, offering their quiet, ancient assurance. Within, Columbus balances truth and hope like two weights upon a scale, careful never to let either fall too heavily. The crew may never know the full shape of his thoughts, yet they feel the effect in subtle ways. When he speaks at dawn, telling them how far they have come, his voice is measured, his tone calm, and the men, hearing only the gentler reckoning, find strength to face another day. They do not see the longer distance hidden in his journal, nor the doubts he carries alone, but they feel the steadiness he offers, and that steadiness is enough. And so the night passes, the lantern burns out, the journal is closed, and Columbus at last rests his head against the wood, eyes heavy with fatigue. He has not lessened the miles, he has not conjured wind or banished silence, but he has written, and in writing, he has shaped the journey into something endurable. For him, the quill is as vital as the compass, the ink as essential as the sails, for through them he guides not only the ships but the hearts of those aboard. As you drift now into your own rest, perhaps you too feel the comfort of that lantern-lit vigil, the sound of quill against parchment mingling with the hush of waves. You're reminded that every voyage, whether across oceans or through sleepless nights, requires not only courage in daylight, but quiet reflection in darkness. And in that reflection, hope is kept alive, even when truth feels too heavy to bear alone. There are nights when the ocean feels too wide for the imagination to cross, when the horizon closes in like a circle of dark glass, and the mind begins to wander into regions stranger than any map. Sailors, who live each day with the groan of timbers and the sigh of waves, are never short of stories. And when routine becomes heavy, they exchange tales that blur the edge between truth and dream. On such nights, the deck becomes a theatre where men, lit by the swaying glow of lanterns, speak of creatures and realms that live just beyond the reach of their eyes. One tells of a serpent so long it could coil itself around a ship twice over, its scales glistening like wet bronze, its eyes glowing green as lanterns in the dark. He swears that his grandfather saw it off the coast of Africa, rising from the water in silence, watching with the patience of eternity before sinking again into the abyss. Another insists upon the kraken, a beast of tentacles large enough to drag a vessel beneath the sea, its body never fully seen, only guessed by the swirling of waves and the sudden vanishing of gulls. A third speaks more softly of spirits that drift in fog, pale figures that walk across the water as though it were stone, whispering warnings to those who dare sail too far. The listeners shift uneasily, glancing at the horizon as if expecting shapes to emerge from the night at the very moment of telling. Humour slips in too, for even fear needs laughter to soften it. One sailor mutters that the only monster he fears is the cook's stew, which seems to grow new limbs each time it is ladled out, and another adds that if the kraken ever tasted their bread, it would retreat in disgust, sparing the ship entirely. The men laugh, though not too loudly, for laughter at sea often carries a nervous edge, as though they half suspect the ocean itself might be listening. There is something paradoxical in these tales, for even as the men fear the sea's mysteries, they also love them. They speak of monsters with the same reverence they speak of saints, as though the ocean's creatures are guardians as much as threats. The sea, they know, is both cradle and grave, gift and danger, silence and roar. To imagine it empty would be more terrifying than to imagine it full, and so they fill it with serpents and spirits, with leviathans and shadows, so that its immensity carries not only emptiness but story. Columbus listens with measured patience, allowing the men their myths without dismissal. He knows that stories, even wild ones, carry power. A tale told on deck can steady as much as it can unsettle, for the act of speaking aloud binds men together. When they laugh at monsters, they laugh at fear itself, and when they whisper of serpents, they acknowledge the weight of the unknown without letting it crush them. Sometimes he adds his own reflections, not to frighten, but to reframe. He reminds them gently that the ocean is God's creation, and whatever it holds, whether beast or wave or silence, it exists within the design of heaven. To some this comforts, To others, it raises more questions, for even divine seas can hide strange things. Imagine yourself among them, leaning on the rail, the lantern glow painting gold across the planks, the sky above crowded with stars. You hear the sailors' voices weaving stories, some bold, some trembling, all carried by the wind across the dark. The ocean stretches endlessly outward, a black mirror, and in its silence you can almost see the shapes they describe. Coils breaking the surface, tentacles curling like smoke, pale forms gliding across the water. Yet the longer you watch, the more you notice that the sea itself does not change. It remains calm, steady, indifferent, reflecting both their fears and their laughter without judgment. The power of these stories lies not in their truth, but in their ability to hold space for imagination. On land, the horizon is broken by hills, forests, villages, each shape tethering thought to certainty. At sea, the horizon offers no such anchor, and the mind, left untethered, drifts into invention. Monsters are simply the ocean's way of giving shape to infinity, a face to the formless. The men know this, even as they pretend to believe otherwise. When dawn comes and the wind rises again, they laugh at their own nerves, shaking their heads as though shrugging off a dream. Yet when night falls once more, the tales return, inevitable as the tide. Gentle humour continues to temper their fears. A young sailor, listening to yet another serpent story, remarks dryly that if such a beast truly encircled the ship, they would simply cut off a piece and salt it for supper, thus solving both hunger and myth at once. Another claims that should the kraken attack, they need only throw it a cask of the cook's wine, which is sour enough to poison any monster within minutes. The laughter that follows is long and genuine, the kind that warms the chest and lingers after it fades. For the men know that ridicule is often the sharpest blade against dread. As the voices quiet and the stars climb higher, the ship drifts onward, the ocean unbroken, the monsters unseen. Yet, in a sense, they are there still, swimming not beneath the water, but within the minds of the men, reminding them that they are small, that the sea is vast, and that the unknown cannot be crossed without imagination. The monsters of the deep are less foes than companions, giving shape to the sailors' nights, carrying their wonder as much as their fear. For you listening now, perhaps these stories need not stir unease, but rather soothe you, for in their wildness lies a gentle truth, that humans have always filled darkness with stories, not because darkness is cruel, but because it is silent, and silence longs for song. Just as the sailors leaned upon their tales to carry them through the empty horizon, so may you lean upon these words, letting their images drift softly across your mind as you sail into your own sleep. After weeks of seeing nothing but sky and water, the smallest details become signals, carrying more weight than whole maps. A shift in the wind, the colour of the waves, a floating branch drifting past, all of these are gathered by the sailors as though they were treasures, each one promising that the ocean does not stretch into infinity without end. Yet of all the signs the men watch for, none stir their hearts as much as the sudden appearance of birds. It begins with a faint cry one morning, high and sharp, carried across the water like the ring of a bell. At first the men dismiss it as a trick of the wind, the kind of sound the sea invents to tease those who listen too hard. But then a shadow darts overhead, wings beating with purpose, and the deck erupts in shouts. A gull, pale and familiar, circles once before vanishing into the horizon. For a moment the crew stand stunned, their eyes lifted skyward, as though they have been visited by a messenger from another world. To them this is no ordinary bird. It is a whisper of land, a reminder that beyond the endless water lies soil, trees, and homes. More birds follow in the days ahead. Some are small and dark, skimming the waves with wings so quick they seem to stitch the sea to the sky. Others soar high, their calls echoing like laughter, their bodies gleaming silver in the sunlight. The men cheer at each sighting, their fatigue lightened as if the birds have carried away a portion of their weariness. They know that such creatures cannot stray too far from land. They are harbingers, brushstrokes of earth painted across the canvas of the air. Columbus observes carefully, his face calm but his eyes sharp with attention. He notes the direction of their flight, the time of their appearance, the type of bird. To him, they are not merely omens, but evidence, markers of a world drawing nearer. Yet he does not speak too boldly. He lets the men draw their own conclusions, for hope born from their own eyes is stronger than any reassurance he might give. He knows that each flap of wings in the distance is more convincing than all the ink upon his maps. The sailors, for their part, cannot help but embellish the sightings with imagination. One insists that a particular bird's feathers shimmered like emerald, proof that it must have flown from forests where jewels hang from trees. Another swears that the gull's cry sounded like a woman's voice calling his name, though his companions remind him with laughter that no woman alive would shout for him to return. A third claims that the birds are spies of the sea, sent to lure them onward, though even he admits that if the sea wishes to trick them, it has chosen a kindly form. Their banter ripples across the deck, weaving humour into hope. If you close your eyes, you can imagine yourself lying upon the deck, the planks warm beneath you, the sails humming softly overhead. A cry cuts the sky, sudden and clear, and when you open your eyes you see wings crossing the horizon, swift and purposeful, leaving behind invisible trails like brushstrokes across the air. In that moment the sea does not feel endless. It feels like a passage, and you're walking upon it towards something unseen but certain. The birds do not linger, yet their absence carries as much meaning as their presence. For once they have gone, their promise remains, fluttering in the men's minds like feathers caught in memory. Even at night, when no wings can be seen, the talk continues. Men gather by the lanterns, recounting the day's sightings as though rehearsing legends. One says he dreamed of following the birds to a shore where rivers gleamed with silver. Another imagines them guiding the way to markets filled with spices so fragrant that the very air would be sweet. A third, more practical, mutters that the only shore he hopes for is one with taverns, and the laughter that follows eases the sting of longing. Dreams expand to fill the gaps left by hunger and uncertainty, and the birds, whether real or imagined, carry those dreams across the dark. The presence of birds also stirs memory. A sailor from Andalusia recalls olive groves where doves once perched, their cooing filling the air at dusk, and his voice grows tender as he describes the scent of leaves warmed by the sun. Another remembers fishing trips with his father, gulls circling overhead, their cries mingling with the slap of nets against water. A third recalls standing in fields newly sown with grain, watching swallows dart in graceful arcs across the sky. Each story softens the harshness of the voyage, reminding the men that life beyond the sea is not a rumour, but a reality, waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Columbus listens to these memories with quiet respect, though he offers little of his own. His thoughts remain fixed on what lies ahead, not behind. Yet even he cannot deny the comfort in hearing his men speak with voices softened by remembrance, their fears hushed for a while by the simple sight of wings. He knows that when the men believe they are being led forward not only by maps but by living signs, their courage deepens, and courage is as necessary as bread. The birds vanish as quickly as they appear, slipping back into the horizon, but their absence is not emptiness, it is promise. Each sighting becomes a marker, a note in the long song of the voyage, a thread woven into the fabric of patience. For men who've endured silence, storms and stillness, the flap of wings is as nourishing as food, as sacred as prayer. And perhaps for you, drifting now in imagination, the birds carry a similar comfort. You may picture them as brushstrokes painted across your inner sky, signs that whatever horizon you sail toward in your own nights and days, there are always hints along the way, small, fleeting, but enough to remind you that land is never as far as it seems. On long voyages, when the horizon never changes and the sea offers no distraction but its endless breathing, stories become a kind of food, nourishment for hearts grown weary of silence. And among these stories, none are more cherished than those of home. For in speaking of home, the men remind themselves not only of what they left behind, but of why they endure the monotony, the hunger and the uncertainty. One evening, when the sky's painted in streaks of rose and violet and the lanterns have only just been lit, a sailor sits near the mainmast and begins to speak of the olive groves of Andalusia, and the deck falls into a hush around him. He describes the fields as they look in summer, the rows of trees stretching like green waves across the hills, their leaves shimmering silver when the wind passes through them. He speaks of the scent of crushed olives, rich and sharp, clinging to the air near the presses, mingled with the sweetness of wild herbs that grow at the edges of the fields. He recalls the call of doves at dusk, their voices echoing softly as the sky darkens and the first stars appear. He tells of harvest time, when neighbours gather with baskets and laughter, the ground beneath their feet dappled with fallen fruit, and the oil pressed fresh, golden and thick, poured into clay jars that catch the light like captured sunlight. The men listen, as though they're drinking from a spring after long thirst. The sea may surround them with salt and distance, but in this story they taste again the earth, the richness of soil, the warmth of stone walls beneath the sun. Some close their eyes to better picture it, others smile faintly, and even those who have never set foot in Andalusia imagine that they can smell the groves, hear the rustling of leaves, feel the rough bark beneath their palms. The story does not transport them all the way back, yet it gives them a fragment, enough to remind them that the world is not only water. Not all responses are solemn. Humour threads its way in, as it always does. One sailor chuckles that the olives in the tale sound too perfect, too sweet, surely exaggerated by nostalgia, for in his memory olives were sour enough to make a man's face twist. Another adds that he once tried to court a girl by offering her an olive, only to be laughed at for his stinginess, and he claims that ever since he has distrusted the fruit. Their laughter ripples across the deck, warm and teasing, but the original storyteller only smiles, knowing that the memory belongs to him and needs no defence. As the tale continues, he speaks of meals shared at a long wooden table, bread still warm from the oven, dipped in oil, served with wine that tasted of sun and soil. He recalls the sound of church bells in the distance, ringing with a rhythm that seemed to mark not just hours but seasons, weaving time into the fabric of daily life. He remembers walking the dusty paths between fields barefoot, the earth warm underfoot, his younger brothers racing ahead while he lingered to watch the shadow stretch. These are not grand stories of kings or battles, but small memories, and in their smallness lies their strength. For it is the ordinary that the heart clings to when the extraordinary becomes overwhelming. Columbus, listening from nearby, allows the story to unfold without interruption. He knows that such moments are as important as charts and compasses. For men cannot sail on discipline alone. They need to be reminded of the sweetness of life, of the places that anchor them. He himself rarely speaks of his own youth, his eyes always turned forward, but he recognises the value of letting others share what steadies them. To lead men is to understand that their hearts require nourishment as much as their bodies. As night deepens, the lanterns swing gently with the motion of the ship, casting shifting halos across the planks. The storyteller's voice softens, almost like a lullaby, as he describes the way the wind in the olive trees would whisper at night, the leaves brushing together with a sound like quiet prayer. He recalls lying on the ground, looking up at the canopy, watching starlight flicker through the branches, and feeling that the world, vast though it was, held him in a cradle of peace. For a moment the men gathered around him are children again, listening to a bedtime story, their burdens eased by memory. There is a pause when he finishes, a silence filled not with unease but with contentment. Then one sailor sighs, saying he can almost smell the oil lamps of his own village, the smoke rising from hearth fires at dusk. Another murmurs that he remembers the sound of goats' bells along the hills near his home. A third adds that what he misses most is not olives or bread or wine, but simply the sound of his mother's voice calling him in from the fields. Their words overlap, weaving together like threads of different colours, forming a tapestry of longing that stretches across the deck. For you, listening now, perhaps you feel the same hush, as though you too are seated on the wooden planks beneath lantern light, carried by the sea while stories of land drift around you. You can almost taste the bread, smell the oil, hear the doves at dusk. You may find yourself recalling your own places of comfort, gardens, kitchens, fields, or simply voices that once called your name. The voyage continues westward, but for a time the horizon feels closer, softened by memory, gilded by the warmth of home. And so, in the middle of an ocean that stretches endlessly in every direction, the men carry with them olive groves and vineyards, bells and laughter, bread and oil. These memories weigh nothing, yet they steady the heart more than any anchor. In speaking of home, they remind themselves, and perhaps you, that even the farthest journey is never truly separate from the soil that first gave us roots. If food and story sustain the body and the memory, then music sustains the spirit. At sea, where waves speak endlessly but monotonously, and where the horizon refuses to change, songs rise as a rebellion against monotony, weaving voices into ropes that bind courage together. These sailors may not possess the polish of choirs or the precision of minstrels, but what they lack in harmony they replace with force, with heart, and with the deep knowledge that sometimes a tune, sung badly and loudly, is more healing than silence. The first songs begin as work chants, short refrains shouted to keep rhythm while hauling ropes or turning capstans. A leader calls out a line, the others answer, their voices rising and falling like waves themselves. The words are often crude, sometimes absurd, yet the rhythm is steady, and it makes the labour lighter. To pull a rope in silence is to feel each tug as weight. To pull it to song is to feel part of a great emotion, one body working with many hands. The ropes strain, the sails fill, and the men laugh between verses, proud of their own noise. Yet not all songs are shouts. When the sun begins to fall and the heat of the day eases, softer melodies float across the deck. Someone hums first, low and tentative, a tune remembered from childhood. Another joins, then another, until the hum becomes a chorus, the melody reshaped by rough voices into something both simple and profound. Some songs are prayers set to rhythm, others are tales of villages, of love lost or gained, of taverns where the wine flowed faster than time. The voices drift out over the water, mingling with the wind, and for a moment the Atlantic itself seems to listen. Humour sneaks its way even into music, as it does into all things at sea. A sailor composes a verse about the cook's bread, declaring that it has outlasted kings and will surely survive the voyage longer than any man aboard. Another improvises a line about the captain's charts, suggesting that Columbus uses them less to guide the ship than to shield his face from the sun. The crew roars with laughter, the verses growing more ridiculous with each repetition, until the song collapses into wheezing chuckles. The humour is harmless, and even Columbus, overhearing, allows the laughter to stand, knowing that a jest aimed at him is less dangerous than despair aimed at the sea. Sometimes the songs are quieter still, sung by one man alone on night watch. The rest of the ship sleeps, hammocks swaying gently, but above them a solitary figure leans against the rail, his voice carrying softly into the dark. The words are not always clear, sometimes swallowed by the wind, but the melody is enough. It keeps him company, reminds him that even in silence he is not alone that the ocean, vast and indifferent, can still be bridged by the thin thread of a human song. Imagine lying on the deck, wrapped in a cloak, the stars blazing above like an audience of distant lanterns. The ship moves slowly, water slapping gently at the hull, and the men's voices rise together in a tune that sways with the sea. Their voices are not polished, but they are warm, and you can feel them binding the crew together, pulling not just ropes, but hearts into the same rhythm. For a moment the voyage feels lighter, not because the miles have shortened, but because the burden is shared, carried on the back of melody. The songs also serve as memory, carrying pieces of home across the water. A fisherman sings of nets and harbours, a farmer of fields and harvests, a young man of dances in village squares, where lanterns swayed like stars of their own. Each verse is a thread tying him to the soil he left behind, and as the others join, those threads weave into a tapestry of belonging. Even those who do not know the words hum along, and in that humming they too are woven into the fabric of remembrance. At times the ocean answers in its own way. A sudden gust catches the sails at the exact moment a chorus rises, making the canvas boom like a drum. Waves slap the hull in sync with verses, creating percussion beneath the melody. Gulls, drawn by the noise, circle overhead and cry out as if adding their own shrill harmonies. The men laugh, declaring that even the sea and sky cannot resist joining their choir. Columbus listens, though he rarely sings. His mind is bent on charts and reckonings, but he understands that songs are as necessary as stars. He knows that a crew which sings together will endure longer than one that suffers in silence. He sees the way shoulders straighten after a chorus, the way weariness lifts for a time, the way men smile at one another with the ease of brothers. Leadership is not always in orders shouted or paths charted. Sometimes it is in allowing space for voices to rise. The songs continue deep into night, sometimes fading into humming, sometimes giving way to silence, but always leaving behind their echo. Even in dreams, the men carry fragments of melody, the refrain of a work chant or the tenderness of a lullaby. Music becomes as much a companion as the wind or the stars, a presence that steadies hearts through monotony and fear alike. For you, listening now, perhaps these songs reach across centuries to lull you as well. You may imagine the rough chorus rising around you, blending with the sea's eternal hush, each voice a lantern glowing in the dark. The words do not matter. It is the sound, the warmth, the rhythm that carries you. Just as the sailors let songs lighten their burden, you too can let these imagined voices lift the weight of the day, rocking you toward rest on waves of melody. The longer the voyage stretches westward, the more the sea begins to play tricks not with the eyes but with the mind. The horizon never changes, a circle of blue by day and black by night, and though the sails fill and the ropes creak, though the logs record leagues travelled, the men begin to feel as though they are standing still. It is in this endless sameness that whispers first take root. At first they are small, no more than passing comments muttered while scrubbing decks or sharing bread, but like sparks carried on the wind, they drift from mouth to mouth, and before long they glow with quiet unease. One sailor remarks that they have sailed longer than any tale ever told, and still no land has appeared. Another notes that if the captain's reckonings were true, Asia should have risen from the horizon already, its markets and temples waiting like treasures promised in dreams. A third, younger and more anxious, wonders aloud if the ocean itself is endless, if it circles the world without ever yielding shore, a watery labyrinth that traps men forever. The others hush him quickly, glancing toward the quarter-deck where Columbus paces, but the thought has already lodged itself in their hearts. What if there is no end? What if the maps are wrong, the promises empty? The sea a bottomless expanse with no destination but despair. Columbus senses it before the words reach him directly. He sees it in the way the men's laughter grows thinner, in the way their eyes search the horizon with less eagerness, in the way silence lingers after tasks that once ended in songs. Leadership is not only a matter of issuing orders, it is the art of reading the air, of hearing what is not spoken. And he hears now the murmurs rising, fragile but dangerous, the beginning of a storm not of wind and wave but of doubt. At night these doubts grow louder. Men lying in hammocks whisper to their neighbours, speaking of families they may never see again, of fields that will remain untended, of graves that may never be marked. Some recall old tales of sailors who set out upon the ocean sea and were never heard from again, their ships swallowed by silence, their names erased. Others mutter that perhaps the ocean holds no monsters, no krakens or serpents, because the true monster is its infinity, a beast that devours hope grain by grain until nothing remains. The darkness amplifies these fears, the creak of timbers sounding not like music but like complaint, the slap of waves against the hull like the tapping of unseen hands counting down their days. Columbus chooses these moments carefully. He does not confront the men harshly, for anger would only deepen their resistance. Instead, he moves among them, speaking calmly, his voice steady as though it were simply another part of the ship's nightly rhythm. He reminds them that every voyage feels longest at its middle, when the shore behind is forgotten and the shore ahead unseen. He tells them softly that the ocean, vast though it may be, cannot be endless, for all creation has its bounds, and to believe otherwise is to doubt the hand of God himself. He does not thunder these words. He offers them gently, like lanterns set in the dark, each one a small circle of light that pushes shadows back. The men are not fully convinced, but they listen. They nod, some reluctantly, others with relief, and for a time the whispers soften. Yet doubt is not banished so easily. It lingers like dampness in wood, creeping back even after the sun has shone. The men find small ways to voice it again. Jokes edged with unease, sighs too heavy for their years, glances exchanged when they think no one notices. Columbus sees it all, and though he keeps his face calm, he feels the weight of their doubt pressing upon his shoulders like a second sail. Imagine standing on deck during such a night. The sky above is crowded with stars, yet instead of comfort, they seem distant, indifferent. The sea below reflects them faintly, a scattering of trembling lights on dark water, but the reflection feels fragile, as though one wave could erase it entirely. Around you, voices murmur, low and uncertain, their tones heavy with longing for land. You hear the sigh of a sailor as he runs his hand along the rail, as though the touch of wood is the only solid thing left in a world made of water. You feel the stillness in the air, the heaviness of hearts that no song can easily lift. And then, into that heaviness, Columbus speaks again, not with speeches but with reminders. He points to the stars, explaining how they have already shifted in their height, proof that they have indeed travelled far. He shows them birds that fly at dawn, signs that land is not as distant as despair suggests. He tells them, quietly but firmly, that hope is like a lantern, fragile, yes, but able to banish much darkness when tended carefully. He asks them to tend it, not to let the wind of fear blow it out. Gentle humour helps too. When a sailor grumbles that the ocean is too wide to be crossed, Columbus smiles faintly and remarks that the sea must end somewhere, for otherwise the wine barrels would float forever without reaching a tavern, and surely God would not allow such injustice. The men laugh, not because the jest is particularly sharp, but because it offers a momentary release, a reminder that laughter itself is proof of life, proof of hope still breathing. Slowly, the men return to their tasks, their whispers fading into the background hum of ship and sea. Doubt has not vanished, but it has been acknowledged and answered, wrapped in the calm assurance of their leader. The voyage continues. Each mile another test of patience, each day another opportunity for doubt to rise and be met again. Columbus knows this cycle will repeat, knows that fear is as constant as the tide, but he also knows that hope, once lit, can endure against the longest night. And so the ships press forward, westward still, the lanterns glowing softly upon the decks, the stars steady above, the ocean vast and silent around them. The whispers of doubt remain, faint but present, yet woven now with a thread of light, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, a single lantern is enough to guide men onward. It is one thing to speak of hope, another to see it with one's own eyes. After weeks of emptiness, when the sea seems to carry them farther from the world of trees and soil with each passing day, the men grow restless for signs that their faith has not been misplaced. And then, almost without warning, the ocean begins to answer. It begins quietly, as so many great things do. A sailor leaning over the rail one morning notices a patch of seaweed drifting past, its green strands bright against the endless blue. He calls out, his voice breaking the dull rhythm of daily labour, and within moments others crowd beside him, pointing and exclaiming. Seaweed, torn from some distant reef or shore, is hardly remarkable in itself, but here in the middle of the Atlantic it becomes a banner of promise, a whisper from land carried upon the waves. Men scoop it up with eager hands, holding it aloft as though it were treasure, the damp leaves glistening like jewels in the sunlight. The sightings multiply in the days that follow. More seaweed drifts past, tangled into small clumps, each one greeted with excitement. Then come branches, floating gently upon the swells, their bark worn smooth by salt, but their shapes unmistakable. One is small and bare, another still holds green leaves, fresh enough to suggest it was torn from a tree not far away. The crew handle them with reverence, passing them from hand to hand, inhaling the faint scent of earth still clinging to them. For men who have known nothing but salt and tar for weeks, the smell of leaves is more intoxicating than the richest wine. The greatest stir comes when a sailor fishes a carved stick from the water, its surface not shaped by nature but by human hands. The marks upon it are simple, perhaps cuts from a tool, perhaps the work of someone fashioning it for use, but they are unmistakable signs of life. The deck erupts in shouts, footsteps pounding as men rush to see. Some cheer, others laugh, a few kneel in prayer. The air fills with energy, a current of hope that sweeps away the lethargy of weeks. Columbus himself holds the carved stick carefully, turning it in his hands with quiet satisfaction. He does not gloat or shout. Instead he smiles, his eyes shining with the confirmation he has long awaited. He calls the men together, pointing to the evidence. Land is near, he tells them, his voice steady but carrying the force of conviction. The men cheer again, their fatigue forgotten, their doubts lifted like fog by the sun. Imagine the soundscape of that moment. Shouts echo across the deck, mingled with the slap of feet upon planks, the creak of ropes as men lean over the rails to glimpse more floating treasures. The sails snap taut as they are trimmed with fresh vigour, for every man believes that with the next breeze they might see land rise from the horizon. The ocean itself seems to join the chorus, waves striking the hull with brighter rhythm, the air tasting fresher, as though infused with the scent of distant forests. Humour, of course, finds its place even here. One sailor claims the carved stick must be a message from Neptune himself, proof that the sea god is tired of their company and eager to send them ashore. Another jokes that the branch with green leaves is actually a salad offered by the ocean, a hint that their diet will soon improve. The men laugh loudly, and for once the laughter carries no nervous edge. It rings clear, lifted by certainty. At night the mood continues. the lanterns glowing warmly as men gather to discuss what land might look like when it finally appears. Some imagine mountains rising from the mist, others envision fields of flowers, others picture villages with smoke rising from chimneys. One swears he will run barefoot upon the sand the moment they touch shore. Another vows to sleep under a tree even if it means sharing the ground with ants. Their imaginings tumble over one another, fueled by the evidence in their hands, each word painting the horizon more vividly than the last. Columbus listens with quiet satisfaction. For weeks he has carried their doubts like stones in his chest, answering them with patience, with calm reassurances. Now, at last, the sea itself has spoken for him. The floating weeds, the green branches, the carved stick, these are voices stronger than any captain's speech. They are the language of the world itself, promising that the voyage is not in vain. For you, listening now, perhaps you can picture yourself on deck during this moment. You feel the ship alive beneath your feet, humming with energy as men point and shout, their eyes shining with renewed strength. You hold the branch in your own hands, the leaves still fresh, and you breathe in the faint scent of earth, so strange and sweet after weeks of salt. The horizon no longer feels empty. It feels like a curtain about to lift, revealing a stage long hidden. And though land has not yet appeared, the men sleep that night with lighter hearts, their dreams filled with visions of green shores and fresh waters. The sea has given them a gift, not land itself, but its shadow, its echo, enough to carry them forward into belief. And in voyages, as in life, belief often arrives before sight, hope before fulfillment. The signs in the water are more than driftwood and leaves. They are lanterns floating upon the tide, guiding weary hearts to continue until the horizon itself at last breaks open. The 11th of October arrives, and with it the air itself seems to tremble, as though the sea and sky together are holding their breath. The men know that they are close. Every branch, every patch of seaweed, every carved stick has whispered the same promise, but promise is not the same as sight. Hope sharpens into anticipation, and anticipation sharpens into a silence more profound than any lull in the wind. The ships move westward still, their sails filled with the night breeze, lanterns swaying faintly like watchful eyes, and all aboard know that this night may be the last before land. It is Martin Alonso Pinzon aboard the Pinta who gives the first cry. Shortly after 10 o'clock, a light is glimpsed on the horizon, faint, flickering, as though a torch were being raised and lowered in the darkness. Some say it is no more than imagination, a trick of weary eyes, but others swear they saw it too, a pale glimmer vanishing and reappearing with the roll of the sea. Shouts rise, footsteps echo against the deck, men rush to the rails, straining their eyes into the night. Columbus himself sees it, a light that moves not like a star, not like a wave, but like something human, deliberate, beckoning from beyond the horizon. He records it carefully in his journal, his hand steady even as his heart beats fast. The men are restless, unable to sleep. They lean against rails and cluster at the bows, peering into the darkness with eyes that burn from the effort of staring. Some whisper prayers, others mutter fragments of songs. Some stand silent, their hands gripping wood so tightly that their knuckles pale in the lantern glow. The night becomes a long-held breath, drawn in and never released. Every creak of timber, every splash of water, every sigh of rope feels louder than it should, amplified by the intensity of waiting. The stars above are sharp and countless, reflected in the water until it seems as though the ships are suspended between two skies, yet even their brilliance pales against the thought of a light on the horizon, a single flicker that promises everything. End to the journey, confirmation of belief, solid land beneath weary feet. Time itself seems to stretch, the hourglass running slower, the bell reluctant to mark the passage. The men shift restlessly, glancing at one another with eyes wide in expectation, as if afraid that blinking might cause them to miss the first glimpse of shore. Columbus walks the deck with deliberate calm, speaking little, yet his presence is enough. His face is illuminated by the lantern's glow, his eyes steady, his steps measured. He knows that this night is not one for speeches but for silence, for letting the sea unveil its secret in its own time. Still, he feels the weight of it, the long weeks of fear and faith, of hunger and humour, of hope carried like a fragile flame, all of it balanced upon the horizon line of this night. Humour tries, even now, to slip in. One sailor mutters that the light they saw might simply be the moon's reflection, caught in a barrel of the cook's wine, accidentally spilled overboard. Another claims that if it truly was a torch, then surely it belonged to some giant sea spirit who is roasting fish on the horizon and laughing at their impatience. The men chuckle quietly, grateful for the relief, though. Their eyes never leave the dark ahead. Even laughter cannot break the spell of waiting. Imagine yourself there, standing at the rail with them. The salt wind brushes your face, cool and steady, carrying with it the scent of anticipation, if such a thing could be smelled. The deck beneath your feet hums faintly with the ship's motion. The lantern beside you sways gently, and all around you men breathe in the same rhythm, shallow and tense. You peer outward, eyes straining to separate sea from sky, shadow from substance, until the darkness itself seems alive with possibility. Each wave crest suggests a shape. Each flicker of starlight hints at a distant fire. You find yourself holding your breath without realizing it, as though your lungs too are waiting for land. The hours crawl, midnight passes, then 1 o'clock, then 2, each marked by the solemn toll of the bell. The men continue to watch, to whisper, to wait. Some kneel, crossing themselves. Others stand stiff and still, too afraid to move. A few finally collapse into hammocks, though even in sleep their bodies twitch, their dreams no doubt filled with shores half glimpsed. The night is long, yet filled with a kind of brightness, not of light but of expectation, as if dawn itself were already approaching even while the stars still blaze. Columbus remains on deck, his eyes fixed upon the horizon. He has dreamed of this moment for years, studied maps, pleaded with monarchs, endured doubt and ridicule, gathered men and ships for this single purpose. Now, after weeks of silence and suspicion, the promise stands just ahead. Yet he is not jubilant, not triumphant, only steady, as though he knows that to rejoice too soon would break the spell. He waits as patiently as the sea itself, and in that patience he steadies the men. For you, drifting in this moment, perhaps the night feels long but gentle, like the breath before a final note of music, the hush before the curtain rises. You may feel the anticipation of those sailors as though it were your own, the mixture of fatigue and hope, fear and excitement pressing against the quiet air. You too may lean against the rail, eyes on the horizon, knowing that something waits beyond, something unseen but certain, something that will arrive not with thunder, but with the soft inevitability of dawn. And so the night stretches on, full of whispers, prayers, and beating hearts, each man caught in the stillness of expectation. They do not know yet what morning will bring, but they know this. The journey has carried them here, to this night of waiting, and whether the light they glimpsed was torch or star, dream or truth, it has given them what they most needed, belief strong enough to carry them through till sunrise. Dawn arrives slowly, as though the sun itself understands that this morning must be unveiled with care. The horizon lightens first with a pale silver, then with strokes of rose and gold, until the darkness withdraws, like a curtain. The men, restless from their long night of waiting, crowd the rails before the skies fully awake, their eyes wide, their breaths held in unison. The sea, so long their only companion, gleams softly under the first light, And then, like a dream made solid, land rises from the mist. At first it is only a shadow, a faint line where sea meets sky, easy to mistake for another trick of light. But as the minutes pass, the shape grows clearer. A shoreline emerges, green and tender against the brilliance of morning, its trees lifting themselves into the air like outstretched arms. Hills roll gently in the distance, their outlines softened by haze, and the shore glows with a freshness that feels almost otherworldly. The men gasp, laugh, some shout, some fall silent, each responding as though they are seeing not land itself, but the answer to every doubt and every prayer. Columbus stands at the prow, his eyes fixed upon the rising vision. For him, this moment carries the weight of years. The map studied in dim rooms, the monarchs convinced to grant him ships, the long weeks of silence when even his own men doubted him. Now, before all their eyes, the ocean's riddle has yielded its answer. He bows his head, crosses himself and whispers a prayer. Around him, others kneel, their voices trembling as they murmur thanks. The sea has carried them, and God has guided them, and the dream that once seemed fragile as smoke has hardened into soil and trees. The men embrace, clap one another on the shoulders, laugh through tears. Some kneel to kiss the planks of the deck, overwhelmed by relief. Others stretch their arms wide as though already reaching for the new world rising before them. Even the younger sailors, who only nights before whispered of endless seas and hopeless wandering, now shout with unshakable confidence. Doubt has vanished as quickly as mist before sunlight. The soundscape of this morning is unlike any other. Shouts of joy mingle with the flapping of sail trimmed with fresh vigour. The masts creak as men climb them to gain a better view, their voices carrying down in triumphant cries. Buckets splash as decks are scrubbed clean for arrival. Footsteps thud with renewed energy, and above all the sea itself hums with gentle waves, as though offering applause. The air tastes different too. The men inhale deeply, claiming they can already smell the earth carried on the breeze, a sweetness foreign to the salt-drenched air of the open ocean. One insists he can smell flowers, another swears he smells fruit. A third jokes that if he smells anything it is only the cook's stew still clinging to his clothes, but the laughter that follows is bright, filled with relief. Columbus orders the ships to draw closer. The sight of sand gleaming along the shore grows clearer, and the men marvel at the colours, the green of trees, the soft brown of earth, the shimmer of water running along the beaches. It is as if the palette of the world, long, reduced to blue and white, has been suddenly restored, colour flooding into vision like life into a painting. For weeks their eyes have known only sky and sea. Now they drink in variety as though starving for it. Imagine yourself standing among them at the rail. You watch the green shore rise from mist, the trees swaying gently in the morning air, the sand glistening like powdered gold. You feel the ship alive with energy beneath your feet, men shouting, praying, laughing around you. The breeze carries whispers of earth, subtle but unmistakable, and you realise that you too are smiling without meaning to, swept up in the tide of wonder. Some men speak of treasures, of gold and spices, their imaginations racing ahead. Others speak more quietly of simple things, shade beneath a tree, fresh water from a spring, fruit eaten straight from the branch. For them, the promise of land is not riches but relief, the firm touch of soil after weeks of rolling deck, the stillness of a night unshaken by waves. Each man carries his own vision, yet together they share the same astonishment. The horizon has finally opened, the sea has finally yielded, and the dream has become reality. Columbus records the moment with care, noting the time, the date, October 12th, 1492, and the features of the land before them. His quill scratches with precision, but his eyes lift often to the horizon, unable to stay fixed on parchment for long. He knows history is being written, but in this moment it feels less like conquest and more like wonder, less like ownership and more like revelation. For a man who has measured so much in numbers, this morning cannot be measured, it can only be felt. As the ships draw anchor, prayers are offered again, the men kneeling in gratitude, their voices blending with the hush of the waves. The contrast is clear, the sea's endlessness behind them, the land's firmness before them. They have crossed the unknown and found the solid ground that once existed only in faith. For you, listening now, perhaps the image of that shore lingers like a gentle dream. Green trees lifting from mist, sand gleaming under a rising sun, men kneeling with voices trembling in prayer. You may feel, as they felt, the relief of arrival, the joy of promise fulfilled, the peace of seeing the horizon finally give way. The voyage has not ended. The journey continues. But for this morning, the sea has delivered its secret, and wonder rests quietly upon the deck. The boats are lowered at last, their wooden hulls creaking as they touch the water, and the sailors climb down with careful steps, hands gripping ropes, hearts beating with a rhythm faster than the waves. Oars dip quietly, breaking the surface with steady strokes, carrying them toward the shore that gleams pale gold under the morning sun. Behind them the ships wait, their sails trimmed, their masts rising like patient guardians, but all eyes are fixed forward on the line where sand meets sea. The first moments of approach are almost dreamlike. Palms sway in the breeze, their fronds whispering a language foreign yet familiar, like the sound of a lullaby half remembered. Birds wheel above, flashes of colour against the sky, their cries sharp and bright after weeks of gulls and silence. The air itself feels different, heavy with scents unknown to those who breathe it. The sweetness of flowers, the musk of earth, the salt carried gently by waves onto sand. The men inhale deeply, as though trying to drink the shore into their lungs, to replace the weeks of salt air with something softer. Their feet touch land at last, sinking into sand that gives way beneath their weight, firm yet yielding, a contrast to the rolling planks of the ships. Some kneel at once, pressing their hands into the earth, lifting grains that glitter in the sunlight as though they were fragments of gold. Others cross themselves, heads bowed, prayers whispered in voices unsteady with awe. A few simply stand still, gazing upward at the green canopy of trees, the branches swaying in the breeze, the colours richer than memory had promised. Columbus himself steps ashore, carrying the banner of Castile and Leon, its colours vivid against the bright sand. He raises it solemnly, his expression calm, his voice measured as he declares the land taken in the names of his sovereigns. Yet even this act, formal and weighty as history would later record it, feels softened in the moment, less conquest than ritual, less possession than offering. The men gather around him, their faces lit with reverence, some weeping openly, some smiling with childlike wonder. For them, this is not ceremony, but miracle. And then, as the banner settles into the sand, another sound enters the moment, voices not their own. From the trees beyond the beach, figures emerge, moving with curiosity rather than fear. They are the people of this shore, their bodies adorned with feathers and beads, their movements graceful, their eyes wide with wonder that mirrors the sailor's own. The two groups stand apart at first, gazing at one another across a short distance that feels vast with possibility. The breeze carries the sound of leaves rustling, waves lapping, hearts pounding. The first step forward is tentative, slow, but it is enough. A sailor reaches into his pouch and withdraws a small bead of glass, bright and glimmering in the sun. He holds it out, his hand open, his gesture simple. A man from the shore approaches, cautious yet steady, and takes it, turning it in his fingers, watching light spark across its surface. In return, he offers a parrot, its feathers iridescent, its eyes curious, its voice bursting into sudden squawks that startle and amuse the sailors. Laughter rises, soft and genuine, easing the tension like a tide retreating from rocks. More gifts follow. Beads, bells, and trinkets exchanged for shells, woven bands, fruit carried in woven baskets. The men marvel at the sweetness of the fruit, juice, running down their chins, richer than anything they have tasted in weeks. The people of the island marvel at the beads and bells, their colours and sounds strange yet delightful. The exchanges are simple, yet in them lies a profound tenderness. Two worlds touching fingertips across the divide of language and distance, curiosity stronger than fear. Imagine yourself standing upon that sand, the warmth pressing up through your feet, the air heavy with new scents. You watch as sailors and islanders exchange gifts, their eyes bright with wonder, their gestures awkward yet sincere. You hear parrots crying overhead, the crash of waves behind, the murmur of leaves in the breeze. For a moment time seems to slow, holding its breath in reverence, as though even history itself wishes to tread softly upon this shore. The men explore further, though gently, touching leaves, tasting fruit, marvelling at colours. One sailor laughs aloud at the brilliance of a flower, claiming it must have been painted by angels with brushes dipped in sunlight. Another remarks that even the soil feels alive, rich and warm, a reminder of what the sea could never provide. Their voices carry a kind of reverence usually reserved for holy places, for this land, new to them, feels sacred in its freshness. Columbus, though mindful of his duty, allows the men their wonder. He too gazes upward at the canopy, the parrots, the fruits glistening in baskets, and feels for a moment that the world has expanded beyond measure. His journal later will record distances, directions, names, but in this moment the details do not matter. What matters is the hush of awe, the quiet joy of arrival, the softness of first touch. As the sun climbs higher, casting gold across the water, the two groups mingle more freely, gestures growing easier, laughter more frequent. Children appear from the trees, their eyes wide with delight at the trinkets offered, their voices carrying across the beach like bird song. Sailors crouch to show them beads, to let them ring tiny bells, smiling as the children clap their hands. The air is filled with curiosity, with discovery, with the warmth of shared humanity. For you, listening now, perhaps this shore feels near, as though you too stand there, sand soft beneath your feet, air rich with flowers and fruit, voices around you carrying laughter in unfamiliar yet comforting tones. You may feel the gentle weight of awe, the quiet peace of two worlds, meeting not with violence but with wonder. The sea lies behind, endless and restless. But here upon this quiet shore, the world holds still, allowing space for curiosity to blossom. And so the morning passes, not in conquest, but in exchange, not in thunder, but in whispers, not in dominance, but in the fragile miracle of recognition. Two worlds meet like fingertips pressed lightly through water, separate yet touching, brief yet unforgettable. The sailors, weary from weeks at sea, find themselves steadied by this moment, their hearts calmed by the sight of trees, of faces, of gifts exchanged in kindness. The ocean has carried them into mystery, but the shore has received them with softness, and for a time history itself seems to rest, hushed and reverent, upon this quiet shore. The voyage that began with anxious preparation and weeks of restless waiting now settles into memory. The men walk upon land, their feet steady on soil, their hands filled with gifts of fruit and feathers, their eyes wide with the strangeness of new faces and new sounds. Yet even as they marvel at the green shore and the voices of strangers, part of them still feels the ocean's presence, as though the sea itself continues to cradle them, whispering that its song will never fully leave their ears. For the sea is more than the space they crossed. It is the companion that carried them, the voice that rocked them through storms, through silence, through doubt, through nights when stars were their only light. The sailors laugh now upon the sand, but when they close their eyes they still hear the creak of masts, the sigh of sails, the endless breathing of waves. The sea has carved itself into their hearts, not as enemy or friend alone, but as something larger, something eternal. Columbus records the moment of landfall, writes carefully of what was seen, what was exchanged, what was felt. Yet even in his words the sea remains, a constant presence in ink as in memory. He knows that without the ocean's vast patience, without its wide and difficult embrace, there would be no discovery, no story, no morning of land rising from mist. He knows too that the sea does not belong to them, nor they to it. They have crossed, but the ocean endures, stretching behind them and before them, endless as time. The men speak softly that evening, gathered beneath palms, their bodies weary yet their spirits restless. They share the fruits they have been offered, sweet juices dripping from their fingers, and they laugh at how strange it feels to taste something that grew in soil rather than salt. They pass around parrots, marvelling at the birds' voices, their bright feathers glowing like shards of rainbow. Yet even here, even with solid ground beneath them, the talk drifts back to the voyage, the songs that eased their labour, the jokes that softened hunger, the quiet nights when stars stretched forever. The sea remains their reference, their measure of time, their eternal background. Imagine yourself listening to that sea again, not as a threat, not as a void, but as a lullaby, steady and timeless. Its waves roll gently, like the slow breathing of a sleeping world. Its surface shimmers under moonlight, a vast cradle stretching beyond sight. If you close your eyes, you can feel the same rhythm that rocked the sailors in their hammocks, the same hush that steadied Columbus as he wrote by lantern light, the same sigh that carried them westward until land at last rose from mist. The sea's lullaby is not finished with them, nor with you. It continues, eternal, weaving through memory and dream alike. Humour lingers even here. A sailor lying back in the sand mutters that he misses the ship's bread, for at least it could double as a hammer when nails were scarce. Another answers that he prefers the fruit of this shore, though if they stay too long, perhaps even these parrots will taste like stew. Laughter ripples softly, not loud, not desperate, but gentle, the laughter of men who have survived together and who now rest in the peace of arrival. The sea, meanwhile, does not laugh, does not cry, does not change for their sake. It continues its song, waves lapping against the beach in steady rhythm, as though reminding them that it is both past and future. The ships wait offshore, their masts etched against the dusk, their sails furled, their hulls creaking faintly as they rest. Soon they will carry the men onward again, for voyages do not truly end. They only pause upon shores before beginning anew. The sea knows this, and so it hums, patient, unhurried, eternal. For you, listening now, perhaps you feel that same hum within yourself. Perhaps you hear the hush of waves in the quiet of your own room, a rhythm steady as your breathing, a reminder that the sea's cradle extends even here, carrying you through the long night. You may picture yourself lying upon the deck, or upon the sand, or simply floating within the ocean of thought, rocked gently by currents you do not need to control. The sea carries you as it carried them, steady, endless, timeless. And so the voyage rests, not in fanfare or conquest, but in wonder. The men kneel, they laugh, They exchange gifts. They remember the journey behind and dream of journeys ahead. The sea remains, vast and calm, singing its lullaby as it has always done, as it will always do. And in that lullaby lies the final comfort, that we are carried, all of us, upon waters larger than ourselves, and that those waters, though restless, are also steady, able to rock us into rest. Now, as the lanterns dim and the night draws close, let the sea's eternal song guide you as it guided them. Let its rhythm settle into your breathing. Let its hush soothe your thoughts. Let its vastness remind you that you're not alone. Whether you dream of olive groves or parrots, of stars over water or sand beneath your feet, the sea carries you still, into sleep, into calm, into the gentle cradle of night. That's where tonight's exploration rests, in waves softening, in lanterns fading, in silence like a harbour. Thank you for joining me. If you'd like to drift again, subscribe or share this calm passage. Sleep peacefully wherever you are,